Chapter 338. Dao piled up the stones around the core seed, leaving only a narrow aisle to go directly to the core seed. At this time, Dao was standing in this aisle. The others did not quite understand the use of these stones, nor did they know what the one in the middle was. Only in Dao's vague explanation, they knew that it was a dangerous thing. They did not recognize the value of the core seed, so they were not willing to approach it. Looking at the increasing number of stones piled up here, Dao's face became more and more happy. Looking down at his palm, the original deep bone injury after drinking the medicine had been a lot better. His own recovery ability was also strong. The skin and flesh of the injury had regenerated. After 2 days, it would grow well. If it was another 5 or 6 days, it would certainly be completely healed. Well, this is it for the time being, Dao said to the people who carried the stones. At first, there were 50 slaves sent here by Dao, but after a few days, there were only 30 people left. Especially in these 2 days, there were a lot of deaths. Hearing Dao's words, the other people's hearts relaxed. The work here was finally done. The task was completed, and they were waiting for the reward. Dao called the people in the underground palace to come here and took out a pottery jar. After opening it, they could smell a burst of wine. For the slightly lower-level slaves, wine was a luxury and could not be tasted often. For the lower levels, they may not be able to taste it in their lifetime. After smelling the wine, some people swallowed hard, their eyes staring straight at the jar in Dao's hand, envious. It was said that only high-level slaves and slave owners could often drink it. Regardless of whether it was good or not, this was at least a symbol of identity. Looking at it made people's hearts itch unbearably. Dao took in the other people's expressions and smiled. "Well, are you all here?" Should be. Someone said, somewhat impatiently. Dao looked at the people who had gathered, counted them, and asked what happened to the missing people. He knew who had been dragged out, but after counting, there were still 2 people missing. One was the person who dragged the body out and did not come back, and the other was the guard at the exit. "Would you like me to go over there and look?" someone said. Dao thought for a moment and shook his head. "Forget it.
Don't worry about them.
Let's drink first. It's been hard on everyone these days. I specially asked for a jar of wine from the young master for everyone to drink." Hearing Dao's words, the other people's hearts were also happy. Although they were very afraid of Dao and even called him Blade Master, now that they heard Dao's words, they couldn't help but feel relieved. The fear of the past few days also dissipated a lot. As for the 2 who didn't come, none of them wanted to leave. If they didn't get any benefits after leaving, it would be a huge loss. Dao lifted the wine jar and took a sip himself. After drinking, he smacked his lips as if he was savoring the aftertaste, making the others envious. After taking the first sip, Dao immediately handed the jar to the people next to him. "Everyone have a sip." There were not so many cups here. For the slaves, there was not so much attention. Usually, everyone shared the food like this. Therefore, after Dao handed out the wine jar, the people who took it directly took the jar and poured it. The others could not wait to come and grab it. The slave who took the wine had just taken a sip, but before he could taste it carefully, the wine jar was taken away. If it weren't for Dao standing here, these people might really fight over this jar of wine. Dao looked at the slaves who were grabbing the wine jar, while making a sound to stop them from robbing, ensuring that everyone drank at least a sip. No one noticed that Dao's eyes flashed fiercely and viciously. Snap! The wine jar that had been drunk was smashed to the ground. The slave holding the jar covered his throat, making a of sound. Blood flowed from his mouth, and his legs seemed to not listen to him. Soft, he staggered a few steps and fell to the ground. One by one, the slaves fell down. Some people reacted to the wine they had just drunk, but it was already too late. Dao quietly stood next to them, watching them fall down one by one. His breathing stopped. A slave who was vomiting blood crawled toward Dao, his eyes full of unwillingness. It seemed that he wanted to drag Dao to hell together. Unfortunately, his arm had not yet touched Dao's foot when it powerlessly hung down, no longer making a sound. Dao contemptuously laughed and kicked. Seeing that the person did not respond, he should have already stopped breathing. However, he was not at ease. The poison people fell to the ground one by one in the chest, crushing their sternum. After determining that there was no possibility of survival, he went to the exit. There should be a guard who had not come over, and it seemed that there was also a slave. In short, they all had to die. He would not let go of anyone who knew the secret here. Even the birds that he rode from Baishar City stopped in one place. After sending the birds back, he walked over on foot and did not let the birds follow him. Before, Dao had selected these slaves and sent them over, but only to repair the underground palace and carry the stones. Dao himself did not want to risk his life to be in close contact with the core seed every day. He would die. When he stole the core seed, one of his arms was almost wasted. Naturally, he did not want to try a second time. Since he did not want to die, then let others die. Now that these projects had been initially completed, there was no need for those slaves to survive. If there was a need in the future, he could send a group of people over. There were many slaves in the desert, especially now in this chaotic time. Dao did not care about the life and death of these slaves. Although Dao himself was a slave, he did not look at the other slaves. When Dao went to the exit, Xiao Xian came out from the dark and looked at the 30 people on the ground who had no breath. He thought, Dao was really ruthless enough. Looking away from the people on the ground, Xiao Xian walked over to the core seed. There were some glowing crystals around, but there was no flame. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Xiao Xian always felt that the crystals here were much brighter than in other places. Even if it was the same kind of glowing crystal, the one placed here was better. Feeling the danger signals from every cell in his body, Xiao Xian looked at the small metal object in the middle of the pile of stones. Dao was hiding it like this, so it must be a very special thing. Xiao Xian's heart moved. Was it related to the metal? The closer he got, the more Xiao Xian could feel the burning tingling in his arms, face, and other places. No, not every part of his body could feel the pain. Xiao Xian took off his outer layer of clothing, revealing the worm skin clothing he was wearing. It was the skin of the big worm that he had picked up when he went to Eagle Mountain with Cha Cha. At this time, there was no pain in the places covered by this worm skin. Thinking of something, Xiao Xian quickly took off the worm skin he was wearing. No matter what, he would take this thing and not leave it to Dao. Quickly rushing over, Xiao Xian wrapped the small metallic object with his insect skin coat. He wrapped it around a few times, so not a single seam was exposed. Sure enough, the tingling feeling quickly disappeared. After wrapping it, Xiao Xian put the thing in the animal skin bag and hid it close to his body. Since the worm skin had been well isolated from this crisis, there was no danger in keeping it close. After hiding it, Xiao Xian jumped lightly and turned over to hide behind a big stone. A few seconds after Xiao Xian hid, Dao rushed over like the wind. When he arrived at the exit, he wanted to kill the sleeping slave. However, he found that there was something wrong with the man. Taking a closer look, Dao's heart was even more suspicious. The slave didn't seem to be too tired and fell asleep. It was more like a trick. Moreover, Dao also felt the disappearance of the core seed. Within the range of this underground palace, the threat of the core seed could naturally be felt. When this threat suddenly disappeared, it must be that something had happened to the core seed. After killing the slave, Dao rushed back to take a look. Sure enough, the place where the core seed was originally placed was empty, and there was no shadow around. Dao glared, incredulously looking at the empty place. The blue veins on his forehead violently jumped, his eyes red, and he issued an angry roar. Under the rage, Dao did not care about anything else. Venting his anger, he slapped a stone pillar that supported the underground palace. The place where he hit suddenly appeared with a clear palm print. At the same time, the pillar body also cracked with a clear crack. The whole underground palace shook, and stone chips and dust constantly fell from the top. Chapter 339. Dao was trembling with anger, his whole body twitching slightly. One was the pain. After all, his injuries had not been completely healed. However, the most important thing was the anger that was rising in his body. Compared to the anger of losing the core seed, The pain was naturally not a big deal. There was no one else here, only Xiao Xian and Dao Yu. The more Dao Yu was like this, the more Xiao Xian was convinced of the preciousness of the thing that he had just obtained. He was determined to keep it well, to give it to anyone but Dao Yu. Xiao Xian could hear Dao Yu's rough breathing, like a raging flame bowl. Just as Xiao Xian was about to go out and clean up the house, he felt a change. There seemed to be some invisible energy rioting around, and it was Dao Yu who was standing there. This kind of rioting power made Xiao Xian feel very bad. Looking through the gap between the stones, Xiao Xian saw Dao Yu's appearance at this time. Dao Yu's coat had been broken, and he could see countless fine lines from his head to his torso and arms, just like his meridians. These fine lines still extended, covering Dao Yu's body. Not only that, but these fine lines were also like his meridians, sometimes thick and sometimes thin. Dao Yu felt that such a change was a good thing. He could feel the power flowing in his meridians, his body was strengthening and changing in a good direction. Only at this moment, Dao Yu did not have too much thought to feel such a change. He was still in the rage of losing the core seed, and the anger made his thinking not so clear. For a moment, he did not think deeply about the results and significance of such a change. What surprised Xiao Xian was that there was a chain-like pattern on Dao Yu's neck, which was the slave pattern of Baishir City. After unlocking the high-level slaves, the slave pattern on their body would also change, not as much as the low-level slaves. At this moment, Xiao Xian felt that the chain on Dao Yu's neck seemed to be tightened, and the bulging muscles made Dao Yu's whole person look like he had swelled up a circle. Dao Yu's change continued, and the airflow around his body was surging wildly. With a roar, the chains were tightened and tightened again. Almost all the bones in Dao Yu's body, such as his sternum, spine, limbs, knees, elbows, and so on, were making a ringing sound, like a rattlesnake shaking its tail. On the other hand, Dao Yu's seriously injured arm was rapidly recovering, as if reborn. His heart became even stronger, and the blood in the meridians in his neck flowed rapidly. His muscles seemed to expand in rhythm with his heartbeat, protruding outwards. Suddenly, Xiao Xian heard a bang sound, as if a chain had been broken. At the same time, the chain pattern on Dao Yu's neck was really broken, and like melting, it gradually dissipated and disappeared. The corners of Xiao Xian's eyes twitched, and he couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. He once asked Su Gu, could the enslaved slaves break free from that kind of shackles? Su Gu said that it was possible, but the probability was very low. To be able to do it to that extent, one must be a genius character. Not only was his talent extremely high, but there was also a certain amount of luck. That was not something that anyone could do, not even 1 in 10,000. Now, there was such a person in front of Xiao Xian, and he did it. In Xiao Xian's mind, there was a fire that did not belong to the slaves. It was not the totem flame of Yanjiao, nor was it the dual-colored flame of the slave owners. In any case, this was an independent flame, out of the scope of the slaves. This was the reflection of Dao Yu's source of power at this time. At this moment, Dao Yu was like a glaring Azura, with the power of a demon. The power fluctuations that broke out made Xiao Xian's face become unusually dignified. Boom! Dao Yu punched the side of the stone pillar, his eyes with a destructive madness, as if he had lost his mind. The underground palace shook even more, and the stones fell with the dust. It couldn't go on like this. Xiao Xian instantly mobilized the power of the totem to the peak. The totem flame in his mind violently rolled, and his blood seemed to boil with the appearance of the totem pattern. His whole body's momentum was like a surging river, resolutely moving forward. It seemed that even if he was facing a thick wall, he would break it hard. Compared to Dao Yu, who had just broken through the shackles, it was not weak. So what if Dao Yu broke through the shackles? He would still kill him. Almost at the moment when Xiao Xian rushed out, Dao Yu's madness shifted the target. From the side of the stone pillar, he moved to Xiao Xian's body, his eyes locked on Xiao Xian's body. At this moment, in Dao Yu's vision, the surrounding stones, corpses, and even the whole underground palace had all retreated. As far as his line of sight, there was only Xiao Xian left, the person who stole the core seed and broke his dream. Seeing Xiao Xian rushing over, Dao Yu did not avoid it. His body flashed, directly facing Xiao Xian. When he jumped up, the stone slab under his feet could not withstand the sudden impact. It cracked into pieces of different sizes, and the stone chips rose like a mist. The dense fist shadows intertwined, and the air seemed to be compressed by a heavy hammer. The shock ripples visible to the naked eye spread out layer by layer, shaking off the stone chips and dust that fell from the top. In a face-to-face encounter, it was unknown how many times they had fought. Waiting for him to fall from the air, Xiao Xian rushed up, rushing straight to Dao Yu. The surrounding airflow seemed to be driven by Xiao Xian, pressing toward Dao Yu. The fist had yet to arrive, but the oppressive air, which was like an army passing through, had already rolled over, clearly showing the power contained in it. In the face of Xiao Xian's attack, Dao Yu, with absolute confidence, did not avoid it. His ankle once again suddenly rotated to meet the attack, and the ground cracked into pieces of stone slab shattered. In Dao Yu's mind, as long as he broke through the shackles, he would reach a height that others could hardly reach. It was just a tribal kid. Even if this person had been promoted, it was still not as powerful as his own breakthrough. After he became a senior slave, he had also killed tribesmen. In his opinion, although the tribesmen had some strange abilities, they were nothing special. Especially after he learned about the secret of the tribe's fire seed, he looked down on them even more.
Kill.
He wanted to kill the person who stole the core seed. In the air, there was a series of roaring sounds, like rolling thunder, like the beating of war drums. Every blow contained the determination to kill. If ordinary people were in the face of such an offensive, they would definitely be blown into slag. In this underground palace under the desert, only the roaring sound was left. Other sounds seemed extremely weak in such a roaring sound. The broken stone slabs were getting smaller and smaller, and the stone chips and dust that were shaken up were like smoke all around. Xiao Xian felt as if he had returned to the original mountain forest full of mystery and crisis, the situation of the battle with the ferocious beasts. In the face of the ferocious beasts, a slight negligence and a weak momentum could cause an irreparable situation. At this moment, it was the same. What's more, it was facing a traitor of the tribe like Dao Yu. I can't retreat, can't be weak. If the other party's attack was strong, he would be stronger. If the other party was fierce, he would be fiercer. If the other party wanted to fight, he would fight even harder. Xiao Xian's totem patterns began to brighten, like a flame cast. Just like when he exposed the blue flame in the Colosseum, it seemed to burn people.
Boom.
Dao Yu suffered a heavy punch. After the punch hit, Xiao Xian did not stop. Followed by a fist shadow that could not be seen by the naked eye, it once again bombarded Dao Yu's chest. Dao Yu, who had been punched twice in succession, was in a sorry state. He flipped upside down in the air and fell heavily to the ground, continuing to slide back for a while before stopping. Xiao Xian wanted to continue a few more times, only to find that on Dao Yu's body, those vein-like patterns, the skin seemed to be cracked and blood oozed out from inside. Dao Yu, who fell to the ground, tilted his head to look at Xiao Xian's direction. His mouth kept spurting blood, his whole body twitching. At this time, it was not anger, but an uncontrollable reaction. The two punches just now were like a signal, like a pair of hands pushing a long domino. With a crash, the domino chain fell down. Dao Yu's sharp and unstoppable aura had declined to a terrible degree. Blood splashed out from the veins on Dao Yu's face. Because of the pain, his expression was distorted, looking more and more ferocious. His eyes were full of disbelief. Breaking through the shackles, he actually lost? If he was given 2 more days, no, as long as 1 day was enough, he would stabilize the power in his body and prepare well. He would definitely be able to beat this kid. He couldn't let this kid steal the core seed. It was his own. Dao Yu's alone. He also wanted to build his own desert city, become a slave owner, and become an overlord. How could he die like this? Not reconciled. He was not reconciled. Lose to anyone, but not to this kid.
No.
Dao Yu's eyes were wide open, staring at Xiao Xian who was coming towards him. The stone chips and dust had fallen. His vision, which should have been clearer, had become blurred. He felt that the power of his whole body was sharply reduced. The powerful and surging feeling of breaking through the shackles seemed to be an illusion. The tide rose, and then the tide receded. Finally, in his blurred vision, the figure that was getting closer and closer seemed to turn into a fire. There seemed to be a pattern in the flame, a double-horn pattern that he had long forgotten. Xiao Xian looked at Dao Yu, who had lost his breath of life. His heart was puzzled. His 2 punches, although he used a lot of strength, if Dao Yu's ability to break through the shackles with that kind of physical strength should not be so easy to die. The final performance was more like a violent backlash. Xiao Xian put his finger on Dao Yu's pulse and pressed it. It had indeed stopped beating. Unlike the strong appearance, Dao Yu's body seemed to be in a mess and seriously damaged. Was it because of the core seed? No, it was not necessarily because of the core seed. Xiao Xian was thinking when suddenly, the whole underground palace shook. A large number of stones fell from the top, and sand seeped down from the cracks above.
Boom.
Another one. It was like someone was deliberately slapping above. The seeping sand expanded like a waterfall, and large chunks of boulders began to fall. The illuminating crystal stone was a lot dimmer after the core seed was wrapped up. Now it was covered with sand and dust. It was even darker. Damn, who was up there in the end? Now was not the time to think about other things. Xiao Xian hurriedly returned in the direction he came from. The torches inserted in the underground palace had long been extinguished, and the underground palace was dark. Fortunately, Xiao Xian changed his vision and could still see the road. After Xiao Xian ran away, the place where he had fought with Dao Yu made a roar and began to collapse. This underground palace, which had cost hundreds of slaves' lives, and now dozens of lives, was about to become a thing of the past. Chapter 340. Xiao Xian ran out along the underground passage. The underground palace behind him was quickly collapsing, and the sound of falling stones was incessant. The place of collapse was getting closer and closer. Xiao Xian pulled open the stone slab and drilled out. Suddenly sensing something, he tilted his head to the side. An arrow shot from behind, almost brushing past Xiao Xian's hair. His longer hair was cut off by the tip of the arrow, and his ears and the side of his face were in pain from the strong wind brought by the arrow.
Bang!
The arrow shot into the sand not far from Xiao Xian. The sand on the sand exploded, and a sand-colored flower bloomed. Without even looking back, Xiao Xian propped himself up and flipped over. The sharp whistle-like sound rang out again. The arrow tore through the air, instantly traversing a distance of tens of meters, and shot into the place where Xiao Xian had been. The sharp arrow with a cold light almost brushed past Xiao Xian's waist and nailed into the sand, blowing up a nearly 1-meter deep sand pit. He didn't even have time to catch his breath. The moment he landed, another arrow came right at him. Xiao Xian jumped up, turned around, and pulled out his sword. With a clang, he pushed away the arrow. Instead of retreating, he dodged and rushed towards the direction of the arrow. At this moment, Xiao Xian focused all his energy on the archer. It was a person wearing a cloak. Her face was covered with a cloth, and her appearance couldn't be seen clearly. Her long hair was blown by the wind, and probably because of the long desert trek, it had lost its former softness and looked a lot more messy. The dust-stained cloth fluttered in the wind, and he could vaguely see a curvaceous figure. Under the cloak, there was some low-key metal armor that didn't shine as brightly. It was a woman, and her status wasn't low. To be able to wear metal armor, she was most likely a slave owner from the 3 major cities. The archer's eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian. Although Xiao Xian was still more than 50 meters away from the archer, he could still feel the archer's cold gaze, just like the murderous and chilling arrowhead pointing at Xiao Xian. The other party held a strong bow, similar to the one Xiao Xian had seen in Dao Ji's hands. He could feel the power of such a bow from the few arrows he had just fired. The difference was that the arrow shot by the other side was more threatening than the one shot by Dao Yu.
Whoosh.
Another one. With the vibration of the bowstring, the arrow spun at high speed in the air, creating a sharp whistling sound as it rubbed against the air. Like a meteor, it shot toward Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian quickly avoided the arrows that were shot. A sand lotus bloomed on the ground, and each time the place where it exploded was very close to Xiao Xian. Ignoring the sand that exploded and splattered in all directions, Xiao Xian locked onto the archer, including her every tiny movement and every look. He judged where the other party would shoot in the next moment, and then made a judgment to avoid the threat of the arrow. At this moment, Xiao Xian's pupils were filled with the archer's shadow and the arrow's shadow. Seeing that Xiao Xian was getting closer and closer, the other party didn't have many arrows in her hand. She directly threw the bow aside and pulled out a nearly four-finger-wide double-edged sword. With a flick of her wrist, she drew a beautiful arc to meet Xiao Xian. The blade of the sword brushed against the blade, splashing a series of sparks. The sword that stabbed towards Xiao Xian's chest was pushed away by a strong and fierce force. Buzz! The sound of metal vibrating was accompanied by a chill that made one's scalp feel like it was going to explode.
Bang!
The ground trembled, and the two people separated. Xiao Xian hurriedly retreated 10 steps. A giant beast ran in front of Xiao Xian. Every step it took seemed to cause the ground to tremble, and its thick hooves stepped on the ground, splashing countless sand. It was this giant beast that had just stepped on the surface of the underground palace, and it had trampled hard. This heavyweight giant beast stood up and then stomped down hard. The curtain of sand that had been raised was forcefully split by the biting cold blade. Xiao Xian glanced to the side. At this time, the place where the underground palace was located had collapsed by more than half. Looking over there was a very obvious huge pit. Xiao Xian looked at the person and the beast not far away. He had never seen this giant beast in Beast City, but he could see that it had been enslaved. The person who had enslaved it was the woman in the cloak next to it. The other party's sword reflected a very dazzling light under the scorching sun, but at this moment, it was no longer attacking. Instead, it stood there quietly. The other party was standing on a sand dune and Xiao Xian was standing at a lower position. Therefore, when the other party looked at Xiao Xian, it was looking down. The giant beast in front of Xiao Xian was swinging its thick hooves, as if waiting for its master's order to start trampling again. However, its goal was no longer the underground palace, but Xiao Xian, the little guy. Xiao Xian raised his eyebrows. He heard the sound of approaching quickly, and it was still behind him. Jie la jie la. Jie la jie la. Behind the dune, a huge snake had emerged. The snake turned over the sand dune and came towards Xiao Xian, but it did not get close. It stopped nearly 50 meters away from Xiao Xian. It was this giant snake that was shaking its tail that was making a rattling sound. However, Xiao Xian's main attention was not the huge rattlesnake that suddenly appeared, but the person standing on the snake's head. Shu. Xiao Xian did not expect to meet Shu here. We meet again. Shu's tone sounded like a friend that he had not seen for a long time. If it were not for the current situation, it would be easy to be regarded as a friend. The visitor was not good. This was what Xiao Xian thought at the moment. Why are you here? Xiao Xian asked. For a slave. Shu seemed to mention it casually, very casually. Dao Yu. Xiao Xian's heart moved. Dao Yu is one of your people? Not exactly. He's dead. Xiao Xian said. It's better if he's dead. I'm going to die. Shu seemed to be more inclined to a dead Dao Yu. The dead are more obedient. After that, Shu turned his head and said in a chatty tone, however, since we meet here, you might as well come with us. What if I don't go? Xiao Xian looked at Shu, paying attention to the cloaked person on the other side to prevent a sudden attack. You refuse? When Shu said these 3 words, although it was a question, it carried a hint of irrefutable meaning. Indeed, now Xiao Xian was surrounded by enemies, 2 slave owners and 2 giant beasts. The situation was indeed very bad. Xiao Xian did not make a sound, and the other two did not speak, waiting for Xiao Xian's reply. Suddenly, Xiao Xian smiled, breaking the deadlocked atmosphere at the moment. "I refuse." Shu was about to speak when his eyes focused, looking at a place. At Xiao Xian's feet, a blue creature drilled out from under the sand. It was a beetle. Then, there was a rustling sound. A black beetle drilled out of the ground, as if to report, rushing out. The yellow sand was quickly occupied by black beetles. Not only around Xiao Xian but further away, including behind Shu and the cloaked person, there were black beetles, like a black wave surging. Chapter 341. This situation was completely beyond Shu's expectations. Looking at his expression, he knew that he had always felt that victory was in his grasp and that everything was under control. But what he saw at this moment shocked him. It was also the first time he had encountered such a situation. Over there, don't look at Xiao Xian's calm face, hanging an unfathomable expression, but in his heart, he was roaring. Fuck. He did not expect that a bug that he had enslaved to practice the method of enslavement would become such a situation. When he was in the Beast City, Xiao Xian found that the beetle had summoned a lot of younger brothers, and now it had directly turned into an army of bugs. The two behemoths at this moment also did not have the prestige they had before. The huge rattlesnake swung its tail and shook off all the bugs climbing up the snake's tail. However, more and more bugs crawled out of the sand, and they did not seem to know how to be afraid. They let the snake's tail shake again and again. Originally, the color of the sand could be seen from some gaps, but it was not long before the ground was black, and the bright carapaces reflected the light. The person in the cloak looked at the beetles that were gathering around her. Even if she was brave and thought that she was strong, she could not stay calm at this moment. She suddenly felt a sense of fear. She kicked away the beetles that were gathering around her and used her knife to sweep away the beetles that were blocking the way in front of her. Then, she jumped onto the back of the giant beast. After she jumped on the behemoth, the place where she had passed before, which had been cleared out of a narrow aisle, was covered by a wave of black bugs in the blink of an eye. The behemoth that stomped its hooves and shook the underground palace. At this moment, no matter how much it stomped its feet, it was useless. These bugs that crawled out of the ground did not know how to be afraid. Shu looked at the black wave of beetles and thought of something. He took out the dried meat from a bag that he carried with him. It was a long journey, so naturally, the food was well prepared. Unlike the slightly rough dried meat eaten by Xiao Xian and others, the dried meat brought by Shu was thinner, as if it had been pressed and then rolled into a roll. Shu unrolled the roll of meat a little, tore off a piece of meat half the size of a palm, and threw it out. The piece of meat fell about 20 meters away from the snake. The previously calm wave of insects instantly surged. Wherever the meat landed, the surrounding insects surged up. That place was like a wave that rose out of thin air, instantly rising higher. Shu, who had been staring at the other side, couldn't help but twitch his eyelids. What he was worried about was that if the beetle army was just a facade, they wouldn't have to worry too much. He had seen these beetles when he was in Rock Hill City. They were all active in the filthy places of the animal pens. However, the reality in front of him had completely shattered his hopes of being lucky. These bugs really ate meat. Shu had no doubt that if a bound giant beast was placed here and encountered such a beetle army, it would be tantamount to a death warrant thrown out by the Grim Reaper. The outcome would certainly be the same as that piece of meat just now. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Obviously, such a small piece of meat did not satisfy the beetle army at all. Instead, it made the beetles even more anxious and ferocious. As if waiting for the order to attack, more and more beetles surrounded the two giant beasts, like hungry ghosts smelling the smell of food, greedily looking at the food in front of them. If they could speak, they would probably shout at this time. The enemy is difficult to deal with. Wait for the boss's order. Brothers together. The hand of the person in the cloak holding the knife trembled a little. When walking in the desert, many people were afraid of encountering the dangerous desert beasts, but for her, the bigger threat was the small desert creatures, and they were in large groups. Even if she was knowledgeable, she had never encountered such a swarm of insects. Talking to them about feelings, reasoning, and conditions? What a joke. It was useless to talk. These insects did not have that high of intelligence to understand. The only thing she could do was to talk to the commander of these insects. The person in the cloak looked at Xirshu, moved her gaze to Xiao Xian, and finally stared at the blue beetle at Xiao Xian's feet. If she hadn't dropped the bow and arrow just now, if she could have killed the big blue beetle, how would the situation have changed? Almost at the moment she had the intention to kill, Xiao Xian looked over there. Meeting Xiao Xian's eyes, the person in the cloak felt a chill in her heart. She glanced at Xirshu and saw Xirshu shake his head, so she temporarily suppressed the thoughts in her heart. This person's perception was too keen. If he didn't succeed in one move, and this brat fought with all his might, then both sides might suffer. She didn't want to risk her life here. The movement over at the Colosseum, was it you who caused it? Xirshu asked in a deep voice. That day, many people saw this kind of black beetle appear in the place where the battle beasts were locked up, but not many people thought deeper. After all, in the eyes of most people, this kind of beetle was too small and harmless, so no one cared. Xiao Xian did not refute, nor did he admit it. He just sneered. You say it as if you are innocent. The war in the desert was caused by you, right? You sent people to kill the Baishur city lord, right? Xirshu just smiled, neither denying nor admitting it. Forget it. That's it for today. I didn't expect you to have such ability. However, if you have something to look for me, you can go to Rock Tomb City. Xirshu said as he threw a golden metal plate to Xiao Xian, with a logo of Rock Tomb City on it. Originally, he intended to use force, but things were beyond his expectations. Xirshu changed his mind. He always liked to choose in a more favorable direction. Xiao Xian caught the plate that was thrown. I think that if I don't have anything to look for you, I will go back to the tribe after leaving. I will not be involved in the war in the desert. Xirshu was noncommittal. Instead, he asked, do you know why Dao Yu chose to become a slave, and why he looked down on the tribes? Xiao Xian only said, I only know that Dao Yu is a traitor to the tribe and must be killed. But he didn't answer more, waiting for Xirshu's next words. Xirshu didn't care. He appeased the giant snake that had begun to become restless because of the swarm and said, because the slave owners will get stronger and stronger, and the tribe will eventually perish. Xiao Xian put on a look of disbelief. Nonsense. If it were other tribes at this moment, they would probably be furious, right? I'm not lying about this. If you don't believe me, you can pay more attention to see if the tribes are getting weaker and weaker. Are there problems with some of their abilities? Hearing this, Xiao Xian's first thought was the Rain tribe. Yang Sui said that once their Rain tribe's shaman could ask for rain, but later this ability slowly disappeared. Seeing Xiao Xian's expression, Xirshu's smile deepened. He continued, in fact, some people have already noticed it, but they just didn't dare to say it. Xiao Xian didn't say anything. Xirshu decided to put another bomb. You tribes are actually very stupid. You clearly found the facts, but you are unwilling to admit it. Stubborn, conservative, stupid. You don't know that the longer it takes, the more disadvantageous it is for them, and the closer they are to extinction. The only smart one is the Yanjiao tribe, but it is only half smart. The other half will still continue to go to destruction. Xiao Xian's pupils shrank as he stared at Xirshu. Did Xirshu's half-smart refer to the divided Yanjiao tribe? If so, he didn't think that Xirshu's half-smart referred to the current Yanjiao people. Then, there was only one possibility left, the other half of the Yanjiao tribe that had been separated 1,000 years ago and had no news. Chapter 342. Xiao Xian still wanted to ask more, but Xirshu was not willing to say more. You go, we still have things to do here. Moreover, our people are almost here. When the time comes, even if you use these insects, you won't be able to fight. Of course, if you want to know more, you can go to Rock Tomb City to find me. Xiao Xian quickly judged the situation and decided to withdraw first. Let's go, Xiao Xian said from the big beetle at his feet. The blue beetle immediately opened the way, and where it passed, the insects spontaneously separated. Seeing this situation, Shu's eyes flashed thoughtfully. When Xiao Xian left the underground palace, he could not see Shu. Xiao Xian let Sapphire take its insects to forage for food, while he himself rushed to the place where he had agreed with Lei and Tua. As for Shu's words, Xiao Xian did not fully believe it, but he knew that it should be 3 parts true. After Xiao Xian left, the man in the cloak asked Shu with concern, "Are you not afraid that he will tell our things to the slave owners in other cities?" "He won't,"
Shu said.
If Xiao Xian was smart enough and decided to not get involved, he certainly would not reveal more to others. Even if it was revealed, it didn't matter. At that time, the general trend was set. What if he participates? The cloaked man was still not at ease. If he participates, cooperating with such a person may not be a bad thing. While talking, in the collapsed underground palace, a lizard with thick scales crawled out. It was not too big, but it was very flexible. It came to Shu, opened its mouth, and spat out what it had swallowed. A dead man covered in lizard gastric juices appeared on the sand. It was the dead Daoyu. Unlike the appearance when he died, Daoyu at the moment seemed to have lost a lot of blood. Because of the wounds on his body, it was completely impossible to see his original appearance. Fortunately, although he was swallowed into the lizard's stomach, it was basically not digested. The flesh and bones were still there, but it looked shrunken. The man in the cloak saw Daoyu's current appearance and asked Shu with some disgust, "Brother, he has become like this. Can he still be used?" "Of course." Shu looked at Daoyu's current appearance with satisfaction. "When you're alive, you're not obedient. Then you can only use death." At the moment when Daoyu broke through the shackles, he was actually not far from death. It was just that Xiao Xian's appearance had brought forward his death. The person in the cloak was originally monitoring Daoyu. At that time, she was actually inside the underground palace, close to another exit, as far away as possible from the core seed. As for the giant beast that was following her, it buried its body in a sand dune somewhere outside. When Daoyu and Xiao Xian fought, she wanted to help. However, she noticed that Daoyu had broken through the shackles and did not go up to help. Instead, she ran out and summoned the giant beast to trample the underground palace. He wanted to kill Xiao Xian and then take away Daoyu's body. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian was too strong, and there were also those insects. "I can't sense the core seed here." The cloaked man frowned. "The core seed must have been taken away by that kid,"
Shu said.
"Impossible. I didn't feel the core seed on him at all." The person in the cloak could not believe it, but seeing Shu's determined look, she knew that the possibility was great. "Or should we send someone to kill that kid?" The cloaked man said. "If there is no absolute certainty, at this time, it's better to take less risks. Those tribesmen, when they fight for their lives, will not care about anything. There are only a few people who can be tempted with benefits," Shu said. Seeing that there were already a few birds flying over in the air, Shu said, "I'll go back first. I believe that Snowfield City has already started a war with Huichio City. Then do I have to stay in Baishur City to watch?" The person in the cloak asked. "No, you go and tell Su Luan that he can go to Baishur City." The person who came over by the bird wrapped Daoyu's body with a cloth, put it in a long wooden box, and then left with Shu. As for Xiao Xian taking away the core seed, it was better to talk about it after the desert was finished. At the moment, they had no time to think about it. How much could a tribesman who had never been exposed to this kind of new thing think about it? Even those tribesmen who often came to the desert to rob only robbed some ores, not the core seed that made these ores. Because those tribesmen simply did not know that there was a core seed. Besides, if the core seed was not used properly, it was possible to exterminate the tribe. The tribesmen were so stupid. How could they think of the correct way to use the core seed? Thinking of this, the cloaked man was not worried and went in the direction of Luria City. Shu also put his main thoughts on the war in the desert. At this time, whether Rock Hill City's plan that had lasted for 3 generations could succeed or whether Rock Hill City could unify the desert depended on this big storm. However, they did not know that Xiao Xian was not an ordinary tribesman. The use of the core seed, Xiao Xian had even guessed most of it. The rest only needed time to prove the guess. With the core seed, Xiao Xian rushed to the place where Lei and Tua were. When Xiao Xian saw Lei and Tua, the two were anxious. "Xian, I finally see you." Seeing that Xiao Xian was safe and sound, Lei and Tuo's hanging heart finally relaxed. These days, slaves have been entering the desert. "Xian, is there going to be a scuffle in the desert?" Tua asked. "Well, it has happened. During this time, the slaves you saw entering the desert, what was each team like?" Xiao Xian asked the two to elaborate. Listening to the words of the two, Xiao Xian found that the slaves entering the desert this time, a small number were from other cities, and most of the others may be from Shu's people. Thinking of the buildings and increasing slaves he saw in the place where he met Yan Shua, maybe it was Shu who used it to raise soldiers. Xiao Xian only knew one place. He did not know about similar places, maybe there were more. Without saying more, Xiao Xian took out a piece of cloth and took a charcoal pencil to write on it. Lei and Tua had experienced a lot of such things. When they saw Xiao Xian began to write again, they spontaneously stood guard around. When Xiao Xian finished writing, he carefully put the cloth away and handed it to Lei and Tua together with the animal skin bag with the core seed. "You leave now, and leave the desert. The things in this animal skin bag are very important. Don't open it privately. You must take it to the tribe and give it to the shaman. Let the shaman see the content of the cloth first. Remember, look at the content of the cloth first. Don't open it before you see it. Moreover, don't let other people know about this, including the people of our tribe. As for what the shaman decides after seeing the content of the cloth, I don't care. If you can't take this thing back, then hide it first. If you can't hide it, then throw it away. Don't let people know you have this." Seeing Xiao Xian's serious face, Lei and Tua carefully wrote down Xiao Xian's words. "Xian, you can rest assured that even if we die, we won't let other people know." But as they talked, the two always felt that something was wrong.
"Hey?
"Xian, you won't leave with us?" The two just put down their hearts and hung high again. Xiao Xian shook his head. "You go first. I have something to do." "What else? Is it important?" Hearing Xiao Xian say that he will stay in the desert, the two were anxious. "Very important." "How important?" "It's about the survival of the tribe." Now the two couldn't say a word. After telling Lei and Tua, Xiao Xian had to persuade Cha-Cha. This guy was angry. It was rare to persuade people and birds. Xiao Xian looked at the sky, took out a rope and divined. He raised his hand and pointed to a direction. "You go that way, it may be safer." "Xian, after we send the things back, if you haven't returned to the tribe, we will come to you,"
Tua said.
Xiao Xian still wanted to say something, but the two had already jumped on the eagle's back and flew into the sky. Looking at the eagle in the sky leaving in the direction he pointed, Xiao Xian rested on a stone for a while and turned back to the depths of the desert. Chapter 343. He had to admit that Shu's words really made Xiao Xian think a lot. Therefore, this time, Xiao Xian also intended to take advantage of the chaos in the desert to find some useful information. After all, it was related to the survival of the tribe. Shu said that the tribe is going to decline. Yes, but also wrong. He was right. In a short time, there certainly would not be such an obvious change. It could not be seen, so he could not be sure. He was wrong, but there were indeed legends that showed such signs. However, rumors were rumors after all. Xiao Xian could not know the truth. Ask the people of other tribes? Xiao Xian was sure that they would not tell the truth. Once again entering the depths of the desert, Xiao Xian planned to go to Luoya City to see after learning that Shu had provoked the war. After all, he had cooperated with Su Gu. If he could bring a message in advance, maybe he could make more preparations and suffer less. However, when Xiao Xian approached Luoya City, he found that Luoya City had already sent troops to Baishur City to start a war. The slaves lined up in neat rows, as well as the equipment on the slaves, did not seem to be a hasty behavior. It was more like they had been prepared for a long time. Such a fast response? Did they know that Dao Yu was dead? Did they know that Baishur City was at its most chaotic and weak time? Seeing this, Xiao Xian could not help but think more. Then, thinking of Su Luan's previous attitude, looking at Loya City's quick response, Xiao Xian looked at the tall building in Loya City and narrowed his eyes. Was Su Luan also a person on Shu's side? Or were these two people cooperating? If so, Xiao Xian did not have to worry much. No wonder when he heard that the desert was going to be chaotic, Su Luan remained calm and did not worry at all. In this case, Xiao Xian would not show up. After observing around Loya City for a while, he left. Looking for a place where there was no one, Xiao Xian called Sapphire over. Sapphire had been following Xiao Xian all this while. It had a certain connection with Xiao Xian and could sense Xiao Xian's thoughts. Not long after, Xiao Xian saw the blue beetle emerge from the sand. Now, if the blue beetle stood on the ground, its back would reach Xiao Xian's knees. Its appetite was also huge, not to mention that it was carrying a swarm of insects. Therefore, Xiao Xian did not need to see it to know that there was a massacre under the sand. The other insects and small desert beasts hiding under the sand were lucky if they could escape. Those who couldn't could only be swept away. Looking around, Xiao Xian combined what he knew about the various cities. This place was a certain distance away from the other cities, and very few people would appear in this area. Little shit. Xiao Xian squatted down and looked at the beetle in front of him. Thinking back to when he was enslaved, this beetle was so small. Now it had grown beyond his expectations. The blue beetle did not quite understand what Xiao Xian wanted to do. It was not until Xiao Xian stretched out his hand and blue flames appeared that it understood. It was so excited that it kicked its hind legs. It had not pushed a ball for a long time, but when it was excited, it could not help but kick its legs. This was a deep-rooted habit. Xiao Xian decided to unlock the second lock for Sapphire. In the past, he felt that there was not enough time. This insect needed enough space to adapt and grow. At the same time, there were too many variables. But now, Xiao Xian found that this insect adapted faster than other beasts. It was not long before it could lead so many beetles to eat meat instead of collectively pushing a ball of dung. Therefore, Xiao Xian decided to unlock another lock for it. If this guy developed well, it could also help him. Not long ago, Sapphire was leading a swarm of insects. After a while, would it develop into a larger-scale insect swarm? Thinking about it, Xiao Xian was still a little excited. He just did not know if it would go too far. Just as Xiao Xian was unlocking the second lock for Sapphire, in a two-story stone house in Rock Tomb City, Shu had taken Daoyu's body back to the city and handed it over to an old man. Xiao Xian once asked Su Gu if there was such a person as a witch among the slave owners. Su Gu's answer was yes, but it was extremely rare. After all, once you became a witch, you could not be a slave owner. Moreover, the witches among the slave owners were different from the tribal witches. Most of them were direct descendants and could not enslave slaves. In Loya City and many other cities, there were no witches. At this time, in front of Shu, the old man with a white whip and strange patterns painted on his body was a witch. His elders were also witches. They belonged to a special family in Rock Tomb City, no less than a small slave owner. The old man was busy dealing with Daoyu's body. While he was busy, he was also amazed. Sure enough, a slave who broke through the shackles. This bone is hard. Very good, very good. If there were more slaves like this, it would be even better. Shu, who was sitting quietly on the side, suddenly said, "Witch, what do you say? How about I enslave a few insects?" The busy old man was pulling out the internal organs from Daoyu's body, thinking about when to find more powerful slaves. When he suddenly heard Shu's words, he was so shocked that he almost shook the things in his hands. Nonsense. After saying that, the old man felt that his tone was too much. After all, the person in front of him was Shu, not his direct juniors and subordinates. He slowed down his tone and persuaded, "Young master, how can you enslave such lowly things like insects? Ordinary beasts are already lowly, and those little insects are even more lowly." The old man looked excited, his spittle flying as he said a lot. His meaning was to let Shu choose some powerful slaves, such as those desert beasts, quicksand beasts, giant lizards, and so on. Or he could lure some tribesmen into the desert as slaves. If not, he could also choose something that could scare people. What were insects? That was the way to go. Only those who had no ability would play with insects. It must not be like this. If the old man was in front of his direct juniors or subordinates at this time, he would probably start directly. But the one who said this was Shu, the young master. No matter how the old man opposed it, no matter how excited he was, he had to think more about his words. Fortunately, Shu still valued the old man very much. He could also listen to some of the old man's words. No matter what he thought in his heart, at least on the surface, he was still humble. Enslaving insects is not good. Shu asked. Very bad. The old man affirmed. Insects are the lowliest of lowly. Shu asked again. Yes, it's beneath the young master's status. The old man was very sincere. Really can enslaves? Shu did not give up. Young master, please reconsider. The old man threw the things in his hand into the container next to him. He did not bother to wipe his hands. He gave Shu a big salute and seriously persuaded Shu, hoping that the young master could throw away this bad idea. Shu looked at the old shaman who bowed in front of him. This person was good at everything and had enough ability. Otherwise, he would not be so valued by his grandfather, father, and himself. But he was a little too stubborn. Once he decided on something, he would not change his mind. He did not expect that just mentioning the insects would cause such a fierce reaction. Therefore, Shu did not say much. He sighed and said, "Forget it." He did not say anything about Xian's insects. It was useless to say it. Instead, it would make the old shaman say more and waste his breath. When the old shaman heard Shu's words, his hanging heart was put down. He had always disdained those little things that could be crushed with one finger, especially those without wisdom and were not smart. The old man, who thought that his persuasion was successful, straightened up and continued to work. He applied the medicine to the corpses that had been almost processed and then placed them in a room. When the medicine dried, he wrapped them in a cloth and placed them in a wooden coffin. Since Shu's grandfather's generation, he had been collecting the corpses of dead high-level slaves and making them into corpse slaves. This was a secret technique that several generations of shamans exhausted their efforts to explore and research. Now, in the underground palace where the corpse slaves were placed, there were already thousands of corpse slaves. Once the war broke out and reinforcements were urgently needed, these corpse slaves would be used. This was also a hidden card in Shu's hand that was not known to outsiders. By the way, young master, the tribesman you said had great potential. Will he really come? The old man asked. He will definitely come. Shu was very confident about this. If he doesn't come to me, who can he find? Shu, who thought that he had dug a hole and waited for people to jump in, did not expect that Xian did not intend to come directly to Rock Tomb City, but went to another city. Chapter 344. Xian was very wary of Shu. Such a person who could quietly provoke a war was too dangerous. From Shu's words, Xian felt that the decline of the tribe should be related to the slave owners. If he wanted to find the secrets of the slave owners, it was not only Rock Tomb City. In the three major cities, in addition to Rock Tomb City, there were two other cities. It was said that Snowfield City had already gone to war with Fire Hill City. He did not know how Shu had led the disaster to the east. In any case, the current Snowfield City was also quite chaotic. Since Shu had already started on Snowfield City, naturally, he would not let it be peaceful. Snowfield City was known by its name. The place where it was located was similar to the desert of Beast City, with more ice and snow in a year. When Xian came to the border of the area under the jurisdiction of Snowfield City, he saw a vast expanse of white snow and some red and purple flowers blooming on the snow. Probably, these plants were unique to Snowfield City. Compared with the desolate Beast City, there were indeed a lot of plants on the Snowfield side. Just now, A team of 200 people had hurried past. They should be going to the battlefield. Everyone's face was serious or sad. The successive wars had made them suffer heavy losses. Now, the king was like a madman. All day long, he looked like he was going to fight desperately. No one dared to refute the king's orders. If the king said to continue to fight, they had to continue to fight. Even the people of the 3 cities, who had been calm for a long time, suddenly came to war. Moreover, it was a large-scale, continuous battle. No one could bear it. When Xiao Xian came over, he saw a lot of bones. Some of them had been buried by the sand, and some of them were only partially buried. Many of the bones thrown there were eaten by scavengers, leaving only bones. It looked quite miserable. Xiao Xian collected some clothes of Snowfield City slaves along the way. The clothes of the lower slaves were not much different. After lurking around and observing for a few days, Xiao Xian saw an opportunity. When it was dark, he mixed into the end of a patrol team. The slave walking in front of Xiao Xian was already very sleepy. He did not notice that there was someone behind him. He just yawned and followed the person in front of him. The leader of the group didn't pay much attention to it. He was only on guard against the surroundings and didn't notice that there was an extra person in the group. Seeing the gate of Snowfield City approaching, Xiao Xian pulled the cloth hat on his head. In fact, it was a long piece of cloth wrapped around his head. This was a hat that was commonly worn by low-level slaves. Xiao Xian deliberately dirted his face to show his fatigue. He looked similar to the other slaves. The guard in front of the city gate glanced at the group and didn't notice anything wrong. Looking at Xiao Xian, who was yawning at the end of the group, the guard was glad that he didn't have to run around while guarding the city gate. Looking at the people patrolling outside, it was as if they didn't have enough sleep and didn't have any energy at all. It was already late, and they had all returned from patrolling. They were all busy going back to rest, and no one was in the mood to chat with others. The system here was not perfect. There were many loopholes, which made it convenient for Xiao Xian. After the team entered the city, Xiao Xian found a chance to slip into a sand house. The people walking in front of Xiao Xian in the patrol team seemed to notice something, but when they looked behind them, they didn't see anything unusual. They felt that they were probably too tired and confused, so they didn't care much. The sand house, where Xiao Xian was located, had no door. The people who lived inside had become cannon fodder in the war and had not returned. Xiao Xian temporarily settled down there, hiding and waiting for the right time. No one came in at night. As the night deepened, there were fewer people outside. There were no lights, and the moonlight was not as bright as the full moon, but it also cast a not too obvious black shadow under the houses. The continuous war made the people in the city tired. Except for the night patrols, everyone else went back to their houses to sleep. Compared with the former Snowfield City, it was now a lot more desolate. Xiao Xian came out of the sand house, avoiding the people patrolling the city and sneaking into the center of Snowfield City. The palace of Snowfield City was similar to that of Loya City. It was also very high profile, but it was much larger in scale. The guards near the palace were much stricter. Xiao Xian could not sneak in for the time being. He had to find an opportunity. Therefore, Xiao Xian first found a good hiding place and waited for the right time. The house where he hid was much more spacious than the previous sand houses. The materials of construction were mostly stone. The closer to the palace, the bigger the house was. This house was used to store wine. Xiao Xian saw a lot of wine jars. The wine here was not sold, but used as a reward. When the slaves made a contribution, they would be rewarded with wine. The slaves would come here to receive the reward. There were 3 people in charge of the wine house in the house, and they were already asleep at this time. Xiao Xian chose a place to store goods and hid inside. After looking at the furnishings and layout of the house, Xiao Xian guessed that there should be 5 people in charge here. 2 people were transferred out to join other teams, leaving only 3 people in the house. Not only in charge of the wine house, but also in other similar places. Some people were transferred to patrol the city or guard the city gates. Some were even more miserable and were transferred to the foreign war team. The war consumed a lot of manpower and could only be made up by the slaves working in the city. These people were not skilled in their work. Even if they worked in the city, they did not suffer that much. How could they not complain? The consequence of slacking off was that there were more loopholes, giving people like Xiao Xian an opportunity to take advantage of. Those wine glasses looked like they had not been used for several days, indicating that the people who came to receive the reward had not appeared for several days. Thinking of the war in Snowfield City that he had heard before, Xiao Xian also understood that if they were defeated in succession, where would the reward come from? Even if there were people who made meritorious service, the slave owners would not be in the mood to reward them since they were defeated overall. Having been on the road, hiding and guarding, Xiao Xian was also tired. It was rare to find a temporary place to settle down. He intended to take a good rest and replenish his seriously exhausted mental strength. Of course, even if he fell asleep, the necessary vigilance was also necessary. It was impossible to sleep deeply. He came to Snowfield City with the purpose of finding the history of Snowfield City. Luoya City had a place dedicated to history. Su Gu had told Xiao Xian. As one of the 3 major cities, Snowfield should also have a similar place. Xiao Xian hoped to find more information from the history of Snowfield City to answer the doubts in his heart. If he could see the history, he might be able to explain Shu's words. Although the slave owners valued those historical records, the degree of importance was much lighter compared to the tribesmen. Even when recording, they would make changes, belittling others and promoting themselves. While Xiao Xian was resting in the high palace of Snowfield City, the Snowfield King once again flipped the table. The delicate wine glasses and tableware were scattered on the ground, and the wooden table that had just been made was also blown to pieces. Rock Hill City is too much of a bully. The Snowfield King's face was gloomy, his blue veins protruding. He had just received a letter from the Rock Hill City Lord, saying that he should stop and not let the war continue. I'm fighting with the people of Fire Hill. What does it have to do with them? They didn't say anything, but they also turned around and taught me a lesson? The Snowfield King was angry. No. Maybe the people of Rock Hill City were also involved in the theft. Thinking of this, the Snowfield King was even more aggrieved. The core seed, that was the core seed, but it was lost. Thinking of the successive defeats, he trembled with anger. At first, he was angry with the tribesmen and wanted to kill the desert tribesmen. However, he got the news that the tribesmen had long slipped away. He then took back all his energy to deal with others. As for the tribesmen, those timid little minions could be dealt with later. The core seed must be in the hands of Fire Hill or Rock Hill City. The Snowfield King did not know that the timid little minions in his eyes had already taken the core seed and were spying on their history. Chapter 345. Xiao Xian hid in the wine house for 4 days. In these 4 days, he also learned a lot from the 3 slaves of the wine house. The 3 people who were close to the City Lord Palace and had a little bit of power naturally knew more than the lower slaves. Shortly after returning from the Beast City, Snowfield City went to war with the Fire Hill City. The slaves who were chasing the tribesmen were also called back to participate in the war, but the number of defeats was relatively high. Occasionally, when they were about to win, the people of Rock Hill City stepped in and reversed the situation. Snowfield City was once again defeated. In about 20 days, the number of people in Snowfield City had been reduced by more than a third. This was only a rough estimate. The specific number would only increase. However, for the slave owners, the lives of the slaves were not lives. If they were less, they could make up for it later. The important thing was to reverse the situation now. I heard that the king's lost things have still not been found. A slave lowered his voice. It is said that the people of the Fire Hill City stole it. Maybe there are people of Rock Hill City involved in this. Hey, when will this war stop? I don't want to go to war. The slave who had been silent sighed. If this continued, the 3 of them would be transferred. Now the situation was getting more and more serious. Defeat after defeat made the Snowfield King lose face. His anger soared every day. Because of the Snowfield King's anger, it was not known how many slaves were killed. Every day, slaves could be seen being carried out of the palace. Just then, someone came to look for them outside. The faces of the 3 slaves tightened, fearing that it was an order to let them participate in the war. However, when they came back in after a while, their expressions were much more relaxed. It turned out to be wine. Ah, scared me. Tomorrow, send the rest of the wine to the palace. No, I have to drink it quickly. After sending it away, I won't be able to drink it. If I want to drink again, I don't know when I'll have to wait. The person who had just passed the message asked them to send the rest of the wine to the palace tomorrow. The king wanted to reward the palace guards with this wine. The palace guards are good. I heard that they can eat and drink a lot of good things. It's good, but recently, a lot of people have been killed by the king. There were also many guards who died because of anger, which made the guards more or less have some other thoughts in their hearts. The Snowfield king ordered the people in the wine house to send the rest of the wine to the palace in order to appease the guards' hearts. As the 3 of them drank and chatted, Xiao Xian, who was hiding in the utility room, also had an idea. He had been waiting for an opportunity all this time, and this time it was worth a try. If he missed it, who knew how long he would have to wait? Before nightfall, the 3 slaves put all the large and small jars of wine into 2 large wooden boxes. Because they had drunk some privately, several jars of wine were mixed with other things, because the wine was not enough. Anyway, these wines were given to other slaves, so there was no need to pay much attention to them. After loading the wine, the 3 slaves went to sleep. Xiao Xian took advantage of the time when they were sleeping to add something to their room so that they could sleep more soundly. Fortunately, in order to sneak into Snowfield City, Xiao Xian had prepared a lot of desert medicinal plants along the way. When the 3 people fell asleep and made some movements, they did not respond at all. Xiao Xian went to the box of wine and took out the wine placed inside. He cut a wooden board of the utility room into a suitable size and put it in the big box of wine. He felt that it was good. The wine jars were placed on the wooden board. Xiao Xian stood in the wooden box and then steadily lifted the wooden board with the wine. This thing was nothing to Xiao Xian. It was much lighter than the stones he used to lift. He slowly lowered his body and used his hands and feet to carefully hold the wooden board with the wine jars and slowly put it down. After hiding the wooden board and the wine jars, Xiao Xian moved his fingers. The sound of the silk thread flicking was heard, and the lid of the wooden box was accurately closed. Taking back the silk thread, Xiao Xian took a little rest and waited for tomorrow to come. The next day, the 3 slaves were still sleeping. Because of Xiao Xian's addition, the 3 people not only slept deeply but also woke up later than usual. So when the people carrying the wine came, the 3 slaves in the wine house were still sleeping. Some of the slaves carrying the wine were palace guards. It was rare to hear that the king wanted to reward them with something. Naturally, they were very active and specially brought people to carry it. Seeing that the 3 people in the wine house were still sleeping, they kicked the door open and rudely woke the 3 people up. Regardless of the confused and absent-minded 3 people, they went directly to the place where the wine was stored. When they saw that the 2 big boxes had been packed, they were satisfied. They opened the lid and looked inside, complaining that there was not enough wine. They dug out all the wine hidden by the 3 people in the wine house and threw it all into the wooden box. When the wooden box was full, they held it by themselves. When the guards took the wooden box away, Xiao Xian could not see the expressions of the 3 people in the wine house. But when he thought about it, he knew that the 3 people must be cursing in their hearts. It was not easy to hide a little, but it was all taken away. Because it was the palace guards who carried the wine, the guards at the gate of the palace did not check it strictly. They also talked and laughed with the people who carried the wine, discussing when the wine would be distributed. The wooden box was carried to the cargo room. Although the slaves guarding it were eager, they also knew that the reward had to be arranged by the slave owners. If they privately divided it, they would be scolded. They only secretly took 2 small bottles of wine from the box and hid them in their clothes before leaving. When the people carrying the wine left, Xiao Xian listened to the movements outside. There was no one around, so he came out of the box. It was quite difficult to quietly come out from under the box piled with wine jars. Fortunately, Xiao Xian's strength was great and he was stable. If it was replaced by a weaker person with poor balance, it would be impossible. When he came out, a bottle almost fell to the ground. Xiao Xian quickly used his foot to cushion the fall and let the bottle land safely without making a big sound. Although it did not take much time to come out of the wooden box, the difficulty factor was high. After completing it, Xiao Xian was sweating. Putting the wooden board in an inconspicuous corner, he put the bottle back into the wooden box and closed the lid. Xiao Xian waited until there were no guards outside before he slipped out. The palace in Snowfield City was larger than the one in Loya City. Xiao Xian was not clear about the layout here. He just walked and hid, avoiding the patrolling slaves. For those places with layers of guards, Xiao Xian also temporarily avoided them. Those places should be where the slave owners were. Looking at the layout of the palace, there were basically only a few places that were heavily guarded. Other places were only guarded by a small number of slaves. They were also very loose, with low morale and no spirit. In the place with few guards, Xiao Xian looked for a small circle. He heard two young men and women whispering about the stone room where the notes were hidden. Xiao Xian quietly followed them. The two were not husband and wife, but they behaved intimately. They did not let the slaves follow them and went to the stone room where the notes were placed. Here, it should be a place similar to a bookstore. There were 3 slaves at the door of the stone room. 2 of them were relatively young, and the other was very old and blind. Second young master. The 3 people respectfully saluted. The man called the second young master waved his hand and pointed to the blind old man. You stay, the others go. The 3 slaves seemed to have known this would happen. They did not need the second young master to say more. The other 2 hurriedly left, leaving only the blind old slave to follow the man and woman into a room next to the stone room. Chapter 346. Not long after the 3 of them went in, Xiao Xian heard obscene sounds and the voice of the blind old slave reciting books. In many desert cities, some slave owners were not willing to look at the records left by their ancestors. They could not bear to memorize them, and they were told to treat them with care and not damage them. Over time, fewer and fewer people went to see the records of their ancestors. Later, a slave owner had a brainwave and arranged for his slaves to read the records. He also ordered them to memorize all the records they had read. Whenever he wanted to know something, the slaves who were responsible for memorizing it would skillfully recite it. Thus, there was a class of slaves who were responsible for memorizing. Their full responsibility was to memorize all the records for their masters. These people were like living records that the slave owners could take with them at any time. If they wanted to know something, they just had to ask. They could even beat and scold them at will. Listening to the sounds next door, Xiao Xian, who had sneaked into the stone room, thought, "Those 2 people are really in high spirits. They are messing around and listening to books at the same time." However, the old slave's voice did not fluctuate. It was very calm and was not affected by the 2 people. He was calmer than Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian did not know if it was because of his deep experience. Xiao Xian did not have time to think about the chaotic relationship between the slave owners. There were a lot of animal skin scrolls, wood scrolls, cloth scrolls, and so on in the stone room. This made Xiao Xian very excited. He finally found it. Looking at the classification above, there were also smelting-related books. Xiao Xian looked through them. These records were very old. Some of them were not well preserved. If he used a little more strength, he would have broken them. It recorded the core seed and where the ore for smelting came from. It was similar to what Xiao Xian thought. If the stone was placed around the core seed, it would change over time and become ore. The stone at different distances from the core seed would have different smelting methods because the metal obtained was different. The better the quality of the stone, the shorter the time needed, and the higher the metal content. Xiao Xian looked through the smelting methods described in it. There were records of failure and success. Looking at these records, Xiao Xian felt that the ancestors of the slave owners seemed to have been exposed to smelting for a long time. It was not something they discovered and tried. In this regard, Xiao Xian had to find the origin of the slave owners, about their more ancient history. However, probably too long ago, Xiao Xian really could not find a place to put it. He looked through a lot and did not find what he wanted. At this time, the man and woman next door had finished their business and left, laughing. Xiao Xian put down the things in his hands and hid behind the stone shelf. The curtain at the door of the stone room was opened, and footsteps into the stone room. It wasn't light at all, and every step was rather slow. These were the footsteps of the blind old slave. Xiao Xian heard the sound of the old slave pouring water and seemed to think of something. The old slave sighed, then got up and walked over to where Xiao Xian was hiding. Outside the window, Yang Guang's light came in. Xiao Xian could see the other person's elongated shadow getting closer and closer. He silently took out the knife in his hand. When the other person was 5 meters away from himself, Xiao Xian suddenly got up and took 2 big steps. In an instant, he was in front of the blind old slave. The blade of the knife slashed at the old slave's throat. However, before he could cut, Xiao Xian stopped. Looking at the still calm old slave, Xiao Xian did not move the knife away. He carefully looked at the man. There was no one else outside the stone room. Inside the stone room, there was only Xiao Xian and the blind old slave. Something was wrong. "Are you not afraid?" Xiao Xian asked in a low voice. "Why should I be afraid?" The old slave's voice was gentle. "Aren't you going to call for help?" Xiao Xian asked again. "Why should I call for help?" The old slave's voice was still gentle. Xiao Xian looked at the man again. He was blind and did not seem to have the strength to fight. He was even a little sick and weak. "How did you find me?" Xiao Xian asked. "Smell. There is the smell of fruit wine," the old slave pointed out seriously. This time, Xiao Xian was really surprised. In order to be more hidden, Xiao Xian had changed his clothes after sneaking into the palace. The smell of wine was very light. Even the guards could not detect it. But now it was actually smelled by the old slave. Seemingly aware of Xiao Xian's doubts, the old slave continued, "I am already familiar with the smell here. As long as there is a slight change, I will be able to detect it." The old slave did not care about Xiao Xian's movements at all. He also dragged a stool and sat down leisurely. It looked like he was going to continue chatting with Xiao Xian. This made Xiao Xian wonder if the old slave had mistaken him for another slave owner in Snowfield City. However, the old slave's next words overturned Xiao Xian's guess. "Why did you sneak into Snowfield City?" the old slave asked, but did not get a reply from Xiao Xian. He said, "At this time, sneaking into Snowfield City and coming to the place where the records are stored. Are you from another city?" Without waiting for Xiao Xian to answer, the old slave shook his head and said, "I don't think so. I can feel that you have just looked through the place. Are you interested in the slave owners? Most of the slave owners don't pay attention to the records of their ancestors. So, are you a tribesman?" In the process, Xiao Xian did not answer a word, but the old slave said the answer in a gentle tone. "No." In the end, the old slave's voice still had a hint of curiosity and interest, without any fear or worry. "Was this really a slave of Snowfield City? What do you want to know? Just ask me directly. You don't have to look through it," the blind old slave said, looking at Xiao Xian with a pair of strangely sunken, white and muddy eyes, waiting for Xiao Xian's words. Xiao Xian thought for a moment, temporarily retracting the knife in his hand, and asked, "What is the relationship between the slave owner and the slave?" If other people heard this, they would certainly despise him and say, "Nonsense, of course it is the master-servant relationship." However, the blind old slave was not like this. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, the old slave thought for a moment and sighed. The slave owner and the slave. The slave owner enslaved the slave. It is like planting a seed that has no chance to germinate in the land under his jurisdiction, giving them a chance to grow. Later, the slave owner can also harvest the fruit. However, there are several barriers around the seed. If the barriers are not removed, even if the seed can successfully germinate, its growth will be limited. The slave owners remove the chains, which is like removing the barriers that block the growth of the plants, so that they can continue to grow. When the slave owner dies, it is equivalent to no one taking care of these growing plants. The barriers are still the same. If you are lucky and a slave owner is willing to take over, the plant can be uprooted from the ground and then planted in the place under the jurisdiction of the new slave owner. The size of the plant will not change, and the extent to which it grows is still the same as before. However, there was always a problem with transplanting plants. If something went wrong during the transplanting process, such as the roots and other core areas being damaged, or if there were other abnormalities during the transplanting process, the plant would die before it could be replanted. Just as there is a certain mortality rate when a slave owner changes owners, if there is any mistake in the process of changing owners, the slave will die. Therefore, a slave changing owner is like transplanting. There is a risk in it. If you are unlucky, not only will you not have the chance to continue to grow, but you will also lose your life. As for breaking through the shackles, not every seed planted by the slave owner can break through the barriers by itself. Even if it breaks through smoothly, the situation of broken branches and leaves will appear. In serious cases, it will even affect the original power obtained. This is the same principle as slaves breaking through the shackles. In the earliest days, the slave owners would not easily remove the chains on the slaves unless they had been slaves for generations, and they were all loyal slaves. Only then would the slave owners remove the chains for them. But later, in order to compete, fight, and war, unlocking the chains became common. Xiao Xian listened to the old slave's answer. While writing down these words, he marveled at the old slave's knowledge. It seemed that this old slave really knew a lot. The blind old slave in front of him was just a low-level slave. In terms of strength, he was not even as good as other low-level slaves. At such an old age, he was also sick. Any low-level slave could kill him with his bare hands. However, such a person had memorized almost half of the records stored in the stone room. Moreover, after summarizing these things, he told Xiao Xian in more concise words. Overconfident, arrogant, not putting other people in his eyes, self-righteous. If he continues like this, he will eventually go to destruction. In the end, the old slave sighed. There are more and more rebellious slaves. The old slave even recited a copy of the Guilty Slave volume, which was written by the slave owners of Snowfield City. It listed the influential high-level slaves who had rebelled in Snowfield City in the past 1,000 years. The people who wrote it said that those high-level slaves were heinous, ungrateful, and unscrupulous. They got the ability from the slave owners, but they still chose to rebel.
It was simply not enough for them to die.
There was no doubt that every slave in the Guilty Slave volume died very miserably, but when the old slave said it, there was a sense of pity. Was it a pity that the slaves who betrayed the slave owners did not succeed? Or was it a pity for others? Xiao Xian did not know. Seeing that the old slave continued to feel pity for the slaves, Xiao Xian quickly pulled the topic back. How much do you know about the tribe's fire seed? Xiao Xian asked. Fire seed? It's really a nostalgic word. The old slave paused and seemed to recall a memory from a long time ago.
I don't know much about this.
I only know that the tribe's fire seed is getting weaker. You tribesmen seem to be looking for a solution. The old slave could not answer more questions about the fire seed. Xiao Xian was a little disappointed, but it was already very good that the old slave knew this. If the slave owners of Snowfield City can preserve the records left by their ancestors, maybe you can find the answer you want. Unfortunately, too much is destroyed. The old slave was very emotional. Xiao Xian's face changed. Could it be that he really wanted to go to Shirshu? Knowing that Shirshu had dug a pit there, he still wanted to jump in? Xiao Xian was really hesitant. Unable to get the question about the fire seed, Xiao Xian asked a question he had always wondered. Where do the slave owners come from?
From the sea.
The old slave said. Xiao Xian. Do you think I'm an idiot? Chapter 347. From the sea? Xiao Xian could not imagine this, unless the slave owners were mermaids. However, this seemed impossible. Living in the desert for so many years, how could they be marine creatures? Even if they evolved, it would be a process. After hearing the blind old slave's answer, Xiao Xian's first reaction was that he did not believe it. His second reaction was that he still did not believe it. However, the other person's face was serious, which made Xiao Xian helpless. "What does it mean to come from the seas?" Xiao Xian asked. The blind old slave shook his head. "I'm not very clear, but I heard some people say before that the slave owners came from there." Xiao Xian still had doubts about this. After thinking about it, he asked the old slave about the map of the desert. The map that Su Gu gave to Xiao Xian was not comprehensive. Xiao Xian hoped to see a more complete map here. After all, it was one of the 3 major cities. How could there not be a complete map? For maps, the old slave did not know much. He was blind in his early years. Many of the things that he memorized were only remembered after listening to others read them. Pictures and the like were more difficult. Although he did not remember, the old slave knew the approximate location where the map was placed. He went to the side of the stone shelf and raised his hand to mark a range. "It should be in this area. You look for it." Although his eyes could not see, he clearly remembered what kind of notes were placed on which piece. Xiao Xian carefully rummaged and finally found a few animal skin rolls that looked like maps. "This hasn't been touched for some years. You should be careful," the old slave said. It was indeed old enough. Even if the animal skin was carefully protected in the early stage and usually cared for, the quality of the animal skin was not excellent. With a little negligence, it could easily be damaged. The map drawn on the animal skin roll was very simple, and the scale was not good. It only marked the approximate location of the desert cities and some important places. Some of the areas painted dark on the side should be the sea. Xiao Xian memorized all of this, then put the map back. After flipping through a few more notes, Xiao Xian stopped. The blind old slave held some notes and put them in the place where Yang Guang was to dry them in the sun to prevent them from being eaten by insects or moldy. Although he could not see, it was not difficult to do such things for a long time. He could also feel where Yang Guang was. "If you have nothing else to do, leave this place as soon as possible," the old slave said.
Yes.
Xiao Xian also did not intend to stay for a long time. Recently, there were more things in Snowfield City. Xiao Xian intended to leave later. Don't wait until sunset. After sunset, the defense in the palace will be stricter than during the day, the blind old slave said. Xiao Xian's face changed. He really intended to wait until sunset to act. He did not expect that the palace of Snowfield City would be like this. Could it be that the Snowfield King was often assassinated at night, so he strengthened the defense at night? No wonder the man and woman before came out to fool around during the day instead of at night. Good. Xiao Xian thanked the old slave and watched the old slave carefully move the notes made of different materials. Before listening to the old man's tone, he could hear that he did not have a good view of the slave owners. He even admired those historical traders. But for these notes left by the former slave owners, he cherished them very much. Thinking of this person's talent for reciting books, if it was in a more advanced, peaceful era, he might be a talent for learning. What a pity. How did you lose your sight? After Xiao Xian asked this sentence, he felt that it was impolite to ask this question. It was like exposing people's scars. Seeing that the old slave did not speak, Xiao Xian intended to change the topic, but he heard the old slave calmly say, "When I was very young, I became a slave of the previous Snowfield King with others. Once, I looked at the notes in his hand. The king was in a bad mood and was very angry. I accepted the punishment." The old slave still remembered that at that time, after the king stabbed his eyes, he threw him to the side of the stone room and said, "Don't you like to watch? Then watch enough here." The blind slave could not see the words on the notes, but he begged others to read them to him. He wrote down all the notes he had heard and recited them every day. Xiao Xian heard the words and sighed again. What a pity. Before leaving, Xiao Xian also intended to leave some herbs. There were no herbs to strengthen the body, but there were still some left to treat trauma. The old slave refused. "You need it more," the old slave said. "You?" Xiao Xian looked at the sick old man. If he continued like this, not to mention the pain caused by the injuries, he would not be able to persist for long. Anyway, there is not much time left. The old slave was open-minded and waved his hand. Let's go. By the way, you have to be careful of the Bai Luo. What is a Bai Luo? Xiao Xian asked. It's a desert beast domesticated by Snowfield City. It's not big and usually hides in the palace. Their sense of smell is very keen. If you are not stared at by them, you will rarely be able to escape. The old slave said, After I sneaked into the palace, I did not encounter it. Xiao Xian said. The old slave was not clear about this. After all, his range of activities was limited to the stone room where the notes were placed. He heard other things from others. Maybe the Bai Luo stayed near the king's palace. The old slave said, But you still have to be careful. Well, I know. You can rest assured. Xiao Xian thanked him again and left the stone room. After Xiao Xian left, the old slave sat there quietly. Although he could not see, he could feel the direction of the window. At this time, he had been staring out of the window. His family had been slaves for generations. His ancestors had also become the king's guards. Until his generation, he was sent here early to guard this small stone room. He remembered an old man who used to read notes to him. Before he died, he told him that one day the current system would be replaced by another system. During this time, he could not go out, but he could feel the changes in the palace of Snowfield City. He could speculate a lot of things based on other people's conversations. He also had an intuition that Snowfield City was in danger. He had just said to Xiao Xian that there is not much time left. He was not only talking about himself, but also alluding to Snowfield City. While the old slave was meditating, on the other side, Xiao Xian, who had left the stone room, quietly looked around. There were not many people around. Probably because there were no slave owners living nearby, he did not see anyone except for some routine patrols. Xiao Xian entered from the main entrance of the palace. As for the place to leave, he planned to escape from the back door or other side doors. The palace was surrounded by high and thick walls. There were people guarding inside and outside. Xiao Xian could not easily get out. He could only look at other side doors. Sneaking in, Xiao Xian suddenly had a sense of crisis of being watched. Was he exposed? He quickly looked around and fixed his eyes on one place. There was a tree there, and on one of its branches hung an oval object not much bigger than a fist. At this time, the oval thing on the branch was stretching out, the rolled-up body elongated, and the retracted wings spread out. The nose, which was almost as long as the rest of the body, unfolded and elongated, pointing straight at Xiao Xian's position. Bai Luo. Xiao Xian thought of the creatures mentioned by the blind old slave. If you are not stared at by them, you can rarely escape. This was the old slave's evaluation of the Bai Luo. Xiao Xian did not waste any more time and ran away. He wanted to kill the Bai Luo first, but he had noticed that there were other similar sites around, indicating that there were many hidden Bai Luos nearby, and they were all focused on him. The Bai Luos in the palace were not all around the king's palace. Some of them found a quiet place to sleep. Unexpectedly, they met Xiao Xian and recognized that Xiao Xian was not a native of the city. Beep, a sharp whistle-like sound was emitted from the Bai Luo's long nose. This was like a signal, and the other Bai Luos around also made a sound and flew in the direction of Xiao Xian's escape. The guards around heard the sound and all gathered in the place where the Bai Luo was, shouting, "Someone is invading." However, Xiao Xian's speed was also fast. He already knew where the nearest door was and went straight there. There were no other slave owners living around, and the king and the young masters raised several giant beasts around here. At this time, a Snowfield young master was watching the slaves, helping him train the giant beasts. When he heard that someone was invading, and it seemed that there was only one person, he immediately became excited. This was an opportunity to make a contribution.
Go.
Go and catch the intruder. The other slaves who followed felt bitter. Catching the intruder was the job of the guards. Why did you, a young master, have to get involved? But when the master went over, the slaves couldn't just stand by and watch. They could only grit their teeth and follow. Xiao Xian was like a sharp knife, splitting the encirclement in front of him. Listening to the movement behind him, he caught a glimpse of a large stone that was nearly as tall as a person. It was engraved with the words, Beast Garden. Xiao Xian didn't care whether it was the Beast Garden or the Human Garden. He picked up the stone that was nearly as tall as a person, turned around and threw it out. Because the young master was chasing with a giant beast, some guards didn't dare to get too close for fear of being accidentally injured by the giant beast. The rampaging giant beast roared, as if it wanted to flatten everything. However, it didn't wait for long before a stone was thrown in its face. Its nose was hit hard, and it suddenly had a nosebleed. Its footsteps were a little staggered. Its feet were tripped by something, and its 2 front legs fell heavily to the ground. Its body continued to move forward and hit a row of houses.
Boom. Boom.
The houses here were not the reinforced walls of the Colosseum. Under the violent impact of the giant beast, they instantly fell down. Seeing this scene, the other slaves were full of disbelief. Unexpectedly, they directly threw such a big stone like a ball. Although there was no lack of strong people among the slaves, it was not so exaggerated. Compared with the person who just threw the stone at the giant beast, it was still a little worse. The young slave owner who fell from the giant beast didn't care about the injuries on his body. He shouted, "Tie that man up for me. I want him to be my slave." There were a lot of guards shooting arrows around, but Xiao Xian's speed was fast. Coupled with the chaos just now, he didn't wait for the guards in other places to come. He was already close to the back door of the palace. Chapter 348. Seeing the guards hurriedly close the back door, Xiao Xian didn't slow down. Instead, he sped up. If possible, Xiao Xian wanted to climb over the wall, but he couldn't. Not only was the wall high, exceeding Xiao Xian's jumping range, it was also very smooth. It was deliberate. He could use other tools to climb over, but that would slow him down. Once he slowed down, Xiao Xian would be in danger of being shot into a sieve. Since he couldn't climb over the wall, he could only use brute force. Fortunately, there was only one door. Seeing the figure rushing towards the back door, the guards at the back door couldn't help but feel nervous. They couldn't see what the person looked like because he was too fast. Their eyes couldn't keep up with him. They only felt that he was only one person, not a giant, but he gave them a sense of crisis and oppression, as if they were facing a giant beast. This wasn't the Colosseum, and there was only one person. There was no need to worry, no need to be afraid, it would be fine. As long as the kid came over, everyone would work together to cut him down. If the guy chose to climb over the wall, the guards on the other side of the door had already prepared their bows and arrows. They were all pointing at the top of the wall. As long as the guy climbed over, they would shoot. He was getting closer and closer. The guards' faces twitched due to excessive nervousness. Their eyes were fixed on the figure rushing over, and they roared in their hearts. Impossible. The guy actually chose to go head-on. There were actually 2 doors at the back door. When they heard the commotion just now, they closed one door and didn't close the other because they felt that it was unnecessary. One stone door was enough to stop the intruder. However, at this moment, they suddenly felt uncertain. It was too late to close the second door. As Xiao Xian rushed to the back door, he also crazily mobilized the totemic power in his body. Even after reaching the limit, he still didn't stop. The accumulated power was squeezed again and again. The surging totemic power rushed to every part of his body, but it couldn't find a place to vent. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt, but was forcibly sealed. The magma in the mountain was constantly accumulating, waiting to erupt. Xiao Xian's aura also skyrocketed because of the unceasing accumulation of power and the surging blood in his body. The closer he got to the back door of the palace, the more obvious the cracks on the stone slabs on the ground became. The crunching sounds were like gears moving forward. The guards who were still guarding the door saw this scene and couldn't help but move to the side. They didn't dare to resist. At the moment of explosion, the moment he exploded, he suddenly let out a long howl.
Xiao Xian.
He shot straight towards the closed door in front of him like a cannonball and threw a fierce punch.
Boom.
The ground seemed to vibrate and Was. And the person who had made S's SSS had already rushed S. The guards by the door turned their necks mechanically and stared at the hole that had just been forcefully opened. They felt that this hole was like the bloody mouth of a giant beast. It was terrifying, and the person who had opened this hole was even worse than the giant beast. Too terrible. One of the guards hurriedly wiped away the sweat on his forehead as he recalled the power of the collision with the palace gate. The sound of the collision seemed to be reverberating in his ears. It was as if his soul was about to be shaken by the impact. Outside the palace, the row of people who were staring at the wall with their bows and arrows were also stunned by this sudden scene. A moment ago, they were still staring at the wall, and the next moment, they heard a sound that almost made their hearts jump out of their throats, accompanied by a burst of stones that were spurting out. Then, they only felt a blur in front of their eyes. An elusive figure flashed, and everything was over. Not only the guards at the back door, but at this time, some people were lurking outside the palace, hiding near some of the houses closer to the palace, observing the palace's movements. They were not the people of Snowfield City. When they heard the movement in the palace before, they were still wondering what had happened inside. They wondered if their accomplices who had sneaked into the palace had been discovered in advance. Before they came, they were also told by the young master how to avoid Bailuo. If they failed again, they really did not dare to go back to see the young master. If they failed, they could only give up this mission. However, they did not expect that they would see someone break through the back door of the palace. The people who stared over there were all shocked. Unexpectedly, the back door of the Snowfield Palace was broken. Where the hell did this barbarian come from? At this time, the Snowfield King was in the palace. Listening to the messy sounds coming from his ears, the Snowfield King, who wanted to take a rest, was now not sleepy. Enduring his anger, he listened to the report of his subordinates. The expression on his face became more and more terrifying. In the huge hall, there was a dignified sense of oppression. Everyone did not dare to breathe. The people of Snowfield City were relatively white among the desert cities. But at this time, the Snowfield King, because of several defeats, being provoked again and again, and hearing about the disturbance and the intruder who had successfully sneaked in and broke out, was so angry that his face was red and his blue veins were about to jump out. After the slave who reported to him finished, he stood there trembling, waiting for the king's instructions. So many people, yet they couldn't catch a small intruder? The Snowfield King gritted his teeth, almost growling. He'd escaped too fast. The slave who answered choked back his words under the Snowfield King's angry gaze. If the intruder was exposed at night, they might really be able to catch him. However, the guards at night had not joined in, so some places were inevitably weaker. Moreover, it was said that the intruder's strength was extraordinary, and he even directly broke through the palace gates. Kicking the person in front of him, the Snowfield King was like an angry lion, roaring out, "I want him to die." This time, the Snowfield King thought of the loss of the core seed, and his lungs were about to explode. Regardless of the person who was kicked, the Snowfield King turned to the people and said, "Jinjiawi. Take out 200 Jinjiawi. If they don't kill the intruder, they don't have to come back." The reason why they were called Jinjiawi was not because their whole body was golden, but because this team was the only one fully equipped with metal weapons. The Jinjiawi was a group of people personally trained by the Snowfield King after he came to power. There were a total of 1,000 people. 500 were transferred to the front line to fight with the people of the Fire Hill, and the remaining 500 stayed in the city. Now, the Snowfield King, for an intruder, sent 200 Jinjiawi to chase him down. Why bother? Guarding other places in the city was fine. Why chase a person who had already escaped? Wasn't it a waste? Maybe it was a trick of other cities? Someone next to him tried to persuade him, but he did not have the courage and could only pretend to be dumb. The Jinjiawi may not be ranked in the top of the Snowfield City in terms of individual combat effectiveness, but they were absolutely loyal and resolutely carried out the king's orders. Under the Snowfield King's command, the Jinjiawi, who were on standby, put on their equipment and rode out on their riding beasts. In order to accurately find the target, they took away more than 20 by Luo. Gulialu. On the side of the palace, a heavy stone door that was usually closed opened. 200 people wearing metal armor, riding on their riding beasts, rushed out in a line. Jinjiawi. They actually dispatched the Jinjiawi.
Who was that just now?
It can make the Snowfield King send out the Jinjiawi. I don't know. I can't guess. No matter who that person is, no matter which city he comes from, he has attracted the attention of the Snowfield City anyway. He also took away a part of the Jinjiawi. We can also take advantage of this opportunity to complete the task given to us by the young master to attack the Snowfield Palace. Some of them had already infiltrated the Snowfield Palace. When the time came, as long as there was an inside and outside cooperation, they would certainly make the Snowfield people shed a layer of skin. Once this side was in chaos, it would be impossible to provide strong support to the front line. Xiao Xian, who did not know that the Snowfield King had issued a kill order, was now only aiming to leave the city. Many people in the city only heard the movement on the side of the palace, but because this kind of thing often happened since the beginning of the war, they were curious and no longer paid attention to it. Naturally, the palace guards were busy on the side of the palace, so they did not care. Many people only saw a flash of a figure and did not see who was running in the end. Even if they went forward to stop him, they could not stop him. Either their speed could not keep up, or their strength could not win. As soon as they went up, they were hit. Xiao Xian ran, breaking through the obstacles in front of him. At this time, the city gate was not closed. It was now dusk, and other people who went out to patrol would come back one after another. No one let them close the city gate. Several guards were still talking about whether there was another assassination on the side of the palace. Suddenly, they heard a whoosh, like a gust of wind sweeping past. The speed of the person running past was like a hurricane. The wind and waves that were brought up rolled up a layer of snow on the sand, like scattering flowers behind the running person. What's going on? Just now, it seems that someone ran past. They wanted to chase, but looking at the momentum, they certainly could not catch up, so they simply did not chase. Could it be the assassin on the side of the palace? Then should we close the city gate? What's the use of closing it now? They all ran away. But if there are other assassins, won't they all be let go? The people at the city gate discussed. Finally, the leader decided to close the gate first. If there were people patrolling outside, they would open it again. However, when they closed the gate halfway, they heard the sound of footsteps. When they looked over, they were almost scared to death. Jinjiawi, it's the Jinjiawi. Hurry up, open the city gate. The leader hurriedly opened the half-closed gate again. 200 Jinjiawi, a pair of indifferent and emotionless eyes, looked straight ahead, ruthlessly strangling the people who obstructed their progress, even if these people were the people of Snowfield City. The collision of the metal and the tearing of the flesh, with a cruel and bloody aura, rushed straight forward like a meat grinder, making the slaves in Snowfield City tremble in fear and tremble. The timid ones hid in the corner of the house, as if they were thinking of some fearful memories. They covered their ears, trying to resist the sounds outside. The bolder ones listened to the sound of blood spraying and the stabbing of spears, guessing how many people outside did not have time to escape and were directly strangled. Chapter 349. After Xiao Xian escaped from Snowfield City, he recalled the maps he had seen in the stone room before. He did not plan to go to several cities in the desert. Now, no city was peaceful. Besides, for the tribesmen, those slave owners had never had a good attitude. Even Su Luan had other purposes. Therefore, Xiao Xian's route now did not have any contact with the city under the control of any slave owner. He wanted to stay as far away from those troubles as possible. Originally, Xiao Xian also wanted to go to the seaside. The planned route would lead to the sea closest to Snowfield City. However, when Xiao Xian noticed the people behind him, he could only put down other thoughts and escape. There were 200 Jinjiawi. If Xiao Xian wanted to deal with them, he could break them one by one. However, this group of Jinjiawi almost never acted separately. They probably knew their own shortcomings. The Jinjiawi came out as a complete whole, which made Xiao Xian unable to find the right time to start. Moreover, Xiao Xian could feel that those Jinjiawi were like death soldiers. They seemed to know no fear and kept chasing until the task was completed. If there was a way to deal with those by Luo, Xiao Xian would not have been chased by the pursuers. However, those by Luo were very smart. They never left the Jinjiawi. When they found something unusual, they would drill into the Jinjiawi team and hide. It was difficult, really difficult. Since entering the desert, Xiao Xian was chased for the first time in such a difficult situation. He escaped quickly, but those by Luo could always find him accurately. No matter if he used clothes to make dummies or applied other scents to his body, he could not get rid of the Bai Luo. No wonder the blind old slave said that once you were targeted by the Bai Luo, it would be difficult to escape. Xiao Xian couldn't think of a good solution at the moment. He could only use his advantage in speed to alleviate the current predicament. He thought that if he took this group of people to other cities, he would let them kill each other. But before Xiao Xian could lead them there, he encountered two groups of people from Shaki City and Skywheel City fighting each other. Contrary to Xiao Xian's expectations, when the three groups met, they did not continue to fight each other. Instead, the three groups joined forces to chase after Xiao Xian. This gave Xiao Xian an even bigger headache. The two teams that had been fighting energetically followed the Golden Armor Guards and gave chase. They felt that since Snowfield City could send the Jinjiawi to kill a person, that person must be very special. How special? For example, stealing some good things from Snowfield City? Everyone wanted to fish for benefits. The people of Shaki City and Skywheel City did not care about fighting with each other. They wanted to catch the person who might have the treasure before the other side, and then go back to the city to receive the reward from the king. With such a thing, Xiao Xian did not expect them to fight each other. He could only think about how to get out of this predicament. He had long left the jurisdiction of Snowfield City. There was no snow, and the temperature in the surrounding desert was very high. Xiao Xian stepped on the hot sand under his feet and came to the shadow of the sand dune to take a break. There was not much time left for him to rest. Rustle. The sand on the sand dune slid down. Xiao Xian looked at it vigilantly. He had been hiding his breath very well. Even when he was resting, he did not make any big movements. However, for some of the beasts in the desert, Xiao Xian could not detect them every time. These beasts hid very well under the sand. In the process of Xiao Xian running all the way, he almost stepped on the snakes and scorpions that buried their bodies in the sand. The difference was that at this time, what climbed out of the sand dune was not a small beast, but a giant beast. Xiao Xian had already retreated the moment he saw the movement there. Puff! The giant beast snorted and two sand arrows were ejected from the giant beast's nostrils, piercing into the sand not far away. Looking at the figure of the giant beast, Xiao Xian had a sense of familiarity. The giant beast, which had just been sleeping in the sand dune, noticed that someone was there. It immediately let out a dissatisfied scream, like the wind blowing sand. However, when it saw Xiao Xian's appearance, the roar came to an abrupt end. The horned lizard beast that was stuck in the middle of roaring. Xiao Xian. If it were not for the current situation, Xiao Xian really wanted to say hello to this. Yo, long time no see. This giant beast was the horned lizard beast that he had seen in the Colosseum. However, at this time, there were no traces of red around its eyes. It was probably washed away by the sand. When the Colosseum was chaotic, many ownerless giant beasts ran away. Among them was the horned lizard beast that Xiao Xian confronted in the Colosseum. However, Xiao Xian did not expect to meet it here. Xiao Xian was also worried about this horned lizard beast's revenge. However, the horned lizard beast was more worried than Xiao Xian. At that time, the feeling of fear in the Colosseum was still clear in its mind. These giant beasts did not mainly remember people by looking at their appearance, but also their breath and the power fluctuations around their body. One man and one beast were in a deadlock, guarding against each other until a blue beetle drilled out of the ground, breaking the frozen atmosphere at this moment. The horned lizard beast turned and ran away. Xiao Xian, who was relieved, turned his attention to Sapphire. From the beginning of the successful enslavement, the beetle's carapace was as bright as a gem even when it pushed a dung ball. However, now it was more embarrassed than Xiao Xian. He did not know what it encountered under the sand. Its carapace was deeply concave. If it was deeper, it would be life-threatening. Even if the current injury was not life-threatening for the time being, for this beetle, the injury was very serious. Its wings were damaged, and it could no longer fly. Although they spent most of their time on the ground or under the sand, they could still fly to avoid disaster when they encountered a critical situation. But now, if this beetle encountered another desert beast, it didn't need to be that big. A slightly more ferocious beast could pose a great threat to it. Xiao Xian knew that Sapphire carried a lot of beetles, but the other beetles could not keep up with its speed and fell far behind. Xiao Xian did not know the scale of Sapphire's insect army, but he could be sure that if it was the same size as before, it could not stop the 200 Jinjiawi and the 2 teams from the other 2 cities. There was no hope. Carefully looking at the injuries on Sapphire's body, Xiao Xian did not know what to do. If it was an animal such as a wolf or a lion, he could still know some ways to deal with it. However, he had no way to deal with the insect's injuries. What about your injuries? Xiao Xian looked at the injury on Sapphire's back and sighed. Sapphire scratched the ground and crawled to Xiao Xian. It did not know how to express itself, so it could only circle Xiao Xian. Fortunately, Xiao Xian could feel its thoughts. Unlock it again? Xiao Xian was not at ease. How long had it been since the second lock was unlocked? If he unlocked the third lock now, would it be able to take it? If it could not control the power in its body, it would die. However, looking at Sapphire's injuries and its cautious and eager look, Xiao Xian decided to fulfill its wish. If its injuries could heal after unlocking the third lock, it would be worth it. Such injuries, just like when Caesar was heavily injured, Xiao Xian had engraved Caesar and healed Caesar's injuries. Perhaps unlocking it would have the same effect. However, it was also very risky. If he was not careful, he would die. Blue flames emerged from his hands. Xiao Xian tried his best to concentrate and control the power of unlocking. Looking at the excited blue beetle, Xiao Xian thought to himself, I can only wish you good luck. Chapter 350. After the third lock was successfully unlocked, whether Sapphire could survive or not depended on itself. Originally, Xiao Xian thought he could get the result in a short time. However, after the third lock was unlocked, Sapphire seemed to be asleep. It did not respond to the outside world and was in a state similar to dormancy. Xiao Xian was not at ease and planned to wait, but he had already heard the movements of the Jinjiawi. Xiao Xian admired the persistence of the Jinjiawi who were chasing after them. This was already the 10th day. In addition to looking for food and a short rest, the Jinjiawi spent the rest of their time chasing. Not only the Jinjiawi, but even the Jinjiawi's riding beasts that looked like camels and horses also had excellent endurance. They could withstand the cold and heat and could run for a long time. As for the people of Shaki City and Skywheel City, who were originally following closely behind the Jinjiawi, they were getting further and further away. Seeing that Sapphire still did not move, Xiao Xian could not carry it and run. After all, the people and beasts behind him were chasing after him, not the beetle. Xiao Xian lifted Sapphire and put it on a sand dune. The surrounding sand moved towards Sapphire and hit it. The target of the Bailuo was Xiao Xian. As for other things besides Xiao Xian, they did not care and ignored them all. The team chased after Xiao Xian, bringing a burst of sand and dust. The Bailuo made a sharp beep sound, flapping its wings and pointing its long nose at Xiao Xian. When the dust dissipated, the place was restored to its original state. The fierce wind blew the sand on the sand dune to other places. Soon, there were no traces of human activity. Xiao Xian felt that he had found a dead end for himself. Escaping to the left was the jurisdiction of Shaki City. Running to the right was the area of Skywheel City. Around here, he could already see some of the skywheel pillars that were not growing very well. Xiao Xian didn't know why he had run in this direction. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he had foolishly put himself in a dead end. He clearly knew that he shouldn't be careless when he was running for his life. The desert was so big that even if he led the Jinjios behind him to take a detour, he could still find an opportunity to run back and break through this situation. However, as soon as he started running, Xiao Xian felt that his consciousness was out of control, and he directly ran forward. There were birds flying in the sky. They were not wild birds in the desert, but birds domesticated by the people of Skywheel City. There were also people on the back of the birds. Although Skywheel City did not launch a fierce, large-scale war with other cities and only had some small friction with Sanchi City, it was also affected by the tense situation in the desert. Every day, there would be a patrol team going out to investigate. Now, Xiao Xian encountered a patrol team from Skywheel City. On the right, there was a patrol team from Skywheel City, lying in ambush. Behind him, there were Jinjios chasing after him. And in front of him, there was a cliff by the sea. It was reasonable to say that normal people should run to the left at this time, but Xiao Xian ran straight forward. In the eyes of others, he was really like a madman who was courting death. At this moment, Xiao Xian felt that his legs were not his own. He couldn't control them and rushed straight forward. His mind couldn't think of anything else until the moment he jumped. Xiao Xian suddenly woke up. Unfortunately, he had already jumped. Falling from a high place, he fell into the blue sea and sank. Xiao Xian felt as if someone was dragging him down, and he was falling. Compared to the desert outside, the surrounding seawater was much colder. From the scorching desert to the sudden contact with seawater, and the deeper he sank, the lower the temperature became. The difference in temperature made Xiao Xian shiver uncontrollably. Originally, he planned to go upstream, but found that it had little effect. The water around him was flowing. This kind of water flow made Xiao Xian's scalp tingle. He was too clear about what this water flow meant. He held his breath and stopped the movements of his hands, not daring to move. The huge figure came closer from afar. The light above the sea allowed Xiao Xian to see the stripes on its body, as well as the fangs exposed from its huge mouth. Xiao Xian couldn't even compare to the other side's teeth. There were no claws, but the fin-like limbs did not reduce the power of this giant beast. Being stared at by those eyes, the timid soul probably flew away. The other side seemed to be uninterested in Xiao Xian, such a small person. It just swam around and did not leave. What made Xiao Xian even more desperate was that after he stopped paddling, the speed of his descent became faster. Even if his ability to hold his breath was good, it was impossible to hold in the sea forever. If this continues, he won't be able to leave alive. At this time, outside the sea, on the cliff, the golden armor guards who had chased after them gathered at the edge of the cliff. They looked at the endless blue sea and did not jump down. They were not stupid, so how could they follow them down to their deaths? The riding beasts seemed to feel the pressure under the sea and uneasily stomped their hooves. After appeasing the riding beasts, the leader of the Jinjiawi led everyone to separate and watch Xiao Xian. Once he appeared, they would shoot him. Not far away, the people of Skywheel City were stunned by Xiao Xian's actions. Someone actually went straight to the cliff and jumped down from it. Was this looking for death? Or was it looking for death? The giant beast in the sea seemed to be aware of the many people on the cliff. It was very unhappy about this. It rushed out of the water and turned over. With a roar, the rocks on the cliff collapsed. Even if the Jinjiawi were not afraid of death, they could not help but retreat a few steps with their riding beasts. The people of Skywheel City, who were not far away, were even more straightforward and directly retreated 100 meters. Living in this place, they knew very well what was below. It was an unshakable creature, far from the giant beasts in the desert. The Jinjiawi, who had been ordered by the king to die, wandered on the edge of the cliff for 2 days. They did not see Xiao Xian again, so they inferred that Xiao Xian should have been swallowed by the giant beast in the sea. This was also an indirect completion of the king's order, right? On the 3rd day, the leader of the Jinjiawi waved his hand. Go back. The task was completed, so naturally it was time to go back. As for the people of Skywheel City, who were lying in ambush, they wanted to rob the equipment of the Jinjiawi. Unfortunately, in the end, they did not have the courage. They hesitated and saw that the Jinjiawi had gone away. "Forget it, let's wait for another chance next time," a man from Skywheel City said. Their patrol team did not have enough people. The number of people was not much more than the Jinjiawi. If they really fought, they would definitely lose. "You say, the man who jumped was eaten by the giant beast or sank?"
Someone asked.
"Who cares? It's just a madman." The people of Skywheel City went back. This trip was peaceful, and the road back to the city was smooth. The Jinjiawi was not as lucky as the people of Skywheel City. Returning along the same road, they were blocked by a group of insects. Looking around, a large number of black beetles covered the sand.
Boom.
On a sand dune, the yellow sand was lifted. The blue carapace gradually revealed itself, and with the appearance of this beetle, the originally calm black tide of insects surged like waves. In Snowfield City, because some people attacked the palace a while ago, the losses were heavy. The Snowfield King, who was rarely injured, sat there with a gloomy face. He did not have a good complexion. He was also calculating the time, wondering why the Jinjiawi sent out had not come back. Chapter 351. When the Jinjiawi was sent out, the Snowfield King said, "If you don't kill him, you don't have to come back." However, he was really angry. If he did not kill them, he would not kill all the Jinjiawi that he had painstakingly trained. However, what he did not expect was that his angry words would become a fact. In terms of individual combat strength, the Jinjiawi was indeed not outstanding. They were good at group battles, but the targets of their group battles had always been people and large desert beasts, not those small insects that could flexibly drill in and out of their armor and clothes. At the moment when the insect tide attacked, the Jinjiawi, who had always been calm, also panicked. The formation could not be maintained. The riding beasts that were bitten by the insects violently stomped their hooves, dodging left and right, but still could not get rid of the more and more intense pain. The chaotic formation of the Jinjiawi had dissipated a lot. Coupled with the riot of the riding beasts, the scene was even more unbearable. The Bailuo that had been hiding in the Jinjiawi originally relied on their wings to fly in the air to avoid the disaster. Unexpectedly, before they could fly high, they were thrown down by the beetles that spread their wings. These Bailuo were just domesticated tracking beasts, not combat type. Under the sweeping of the insect tide, it was difficult to resist. The screams, the beeping of the Bailuo, and the clanging of metal were endless. However, the battle did not last long. Those who could break out in a short time had successfully escaped the encirclement of the insect tide. Those who missed the opportunity, even if they could still hold on, could not last long. The pain of being bitten by the insects meant that they had become the food of these insects. Soon, they would only become a skeleton. The people who broke out of the insect tide were injured and rushed in the direction of Snowfield City. As long as they could reach the territory of Snowfield City, they would be much safer. However, they were unlucky. As soon as they escaped from the insect tide, they encountered the people who had attacked Snowfield City several times. When encountering the Jinjiawi, those people may not easily start, but when encountering the Jinjiawi who were in a difficult situation, not making a move was simply a waste of the knife in their hands. After waiting for a few days, the Snowfield King finally could not help but feel the disappearance of the Jinjiawi. The Jinjiawi were personally enslaved by the Snowfield King himself. If they were ordinary low-level slaves, although he could feel it, he would not care. Whether those people were assassinated or because of other accidents, he was not interested in paying attention. Anyway, there would be slaves dying every day. If they were not important slaves, he would be too lazy to pay attention. However, the Golden Armor Guards were different. Ever since he sent them out, he had been paying close attention to them until the connection between him and the Golden Armor Guards was forcefully cut off by the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Then, he was hit by a dull hammer, causing him to have a splitting headache, and he could no longer remain calm. Bewilderment, panic, and disbelief. The Snowfield King suppressed all kinds of emotions in his heart and sent out a team of people to look for the Jinjiawi. Even if they only found the bodies, he wanted to know how those people were killed and where they were killed. The people who went out followed the route that the Jinjiawi had used to chase Xiao Xian. They searched all the way, but they never found any traces. The people who attacked the Jinjiawi had already erased the traces. Not even a bone or a stone would be left. Coupled with the desert climate and sandstorms, when the Snowfield King sent people to look for them, nothing was left. The team looking for the Jinjiawi came to the place where the Jinjiawi had encountered the insect tide and found some traces. However, when they saw those, everyone had the same feeling, as if they were in an ice cellar. Under the scorching sun, they only felt the chill on their backs rising sharply. Their teeth chattered as they looked at the situation in front of them. They shivered and did not even have the courage to go forward. On the vast yellow sand full of wrinkles, metal armors, and some broken clothes covered the skeletons. Those skeletons had been half buried in the sand. The exposed metal armors and those sharp metal weapons glittered under the light of Yangguang. It was a strange scene, not to mention how the desert reacted after the tragic situation of the Jinjiawi spread. On the other side, Xiao Xian, who was in the sea, finally stopped after falling. Xiao Xian thought that he was at the bottom of this place, but in the vision of his special ability, he found that this was not the case. The place under his feet was like the top of a mountain at the bottom of the sea. If he went down on both sides, he could go deeper into the sea. As for what the deeper part looked like, Xiao Xian did not have the ability or time to see it. The place under his feet was the source of the force that pulled Xiao Xian down. Looking around, Xiao Xian found that although the place was not flat, it was still quite wide. He had been under the sea for a long time. If he went on like this, he would suffocate to death. So Xiao Xian thought that he would save up his strength and swim up in one go. The sea behemoth above had left. Probably because of the appearance of the behemoth just now, there were no other fish around. Now, there should not be any other dangerous underwater creatures in a short time. Xiao Xian thought. This was an opportunity to rush out. However, Xiao Xian had saved up his strength. Just as he was about to swim upstream, the surrounding water suddenly changed. Unlike the way the behemoth flowed, it was a large-scale flow of seawater, as if to form a whirlpool. The seawater changed very quickly. In such a short time, Xiao Xian could not escape at all. He could only follow his instincts and lie down, holding tightly to the uneven stone ground under his feet. A whirlpool was indeed forming around him, but it was not the kind of whirlpool seen on the surface of the sea. It was formed vertically, and the center of the whirlpool was exactly where Xiao Xian was. The rotating water flow indicated that the stone ground was not completely in contact with the bottom of the sea. The rotating water flow could flow from below. There seemed to be a suction force around him, sucking away Xiao Xian's body temperature and making it as cold as the seawater. Feeling his body gradually lose consciousness, Xiao Xian had to mobilize his totemic power. The power that poured into every part of his body brought his lowered body temperature back to normal. When his body temperature returned to normal, it also increased Xiao Xian's perception. On land, if he casually mobilized his totemic power in the forest, he would be detected by the dire beasts. Therefore, if he wanted to hide and avoid the dire beasts, he would not easily mobilize his totemic power to the peak, unless it was the moment before a battle. Here, Xiao Xian was originally on guard against the dire beasts that sensed the totemic power and thought that their territory was being invaded. But gradually, Xiao Xian found that there were no dire beasts around. There was not even a small fish. The tearing force around him was getting stronger and stronger, and it was still rising rapidly. Xiao Xian felt that the wounds on his body that had already formed scabs had split open again. Blood splashed out from the wounds and into the sea. His whole body was under a huge tearing force. Xiao Xian felt that his bones were about to be dislocated. He could even hear the creaking sound of his bones, like wood shaking in a storm. Chapter 352. Gritting his teeth, Xiao Xian endured the dizziness caused by the lack of oxygen, as well as the pain of his bones breaking. All he could do was to hold on tightly to the uneven stone surface. He knew that if he let go, he would be pulled out by the force and become part of the whirlpool along with the seawater. If that was the case, there would be no chance of survival. It was as if a huge invisible net had formed around him, and any creature that touched this net would be caught. Under the strong tearing force around him, Xiao Xian had no time to treat the open wound. He could only mobilize his totemic power to close the wound as much as possible to reduce the bleeding. If he did not have the physical strength of a senior totemic warrior, if he did not have enough strength to replenish his strength, if he did not hold on to the stone surface with enough strength, Xiao Xian would not have been able to bear it. Finally, just as Xiao Xian was about to lose consciousness, everything calmed down again. Xiao Xian only felt that his body was lighter. The pressure of the seawater disappeared, and the tearing force around him disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never existed, and it had suddenly disappeared. His trembling bones slowly calmed down, and his tense muscles also relaxed. It was not that Xiao Xian had let down his guard, but that he had no more strength left. He had already reached his limit by holding on until now. The sudden change had ended, and it seemed that he was temporarily safe. This made Xiao Xian let out a long sigh of relief.
Breathe.
Breathe again. It was smooth. There was air. Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked around. At this moment, Xiao Xian mistakenly thought that he had come to another world, a world without seawater. However, after carefully observing his surroundings, Xiao Xian found that he was still holding onto the stone, and not far behind him was still the cliff at the bottom of the sea. The difference was that at this time, the seawater in this place was almost all gone. His clothes, hair, and the few seaweeds on the stone surface were all dried up as if they had been drained of water. On the stone surface, the seaweeds that had been drained of water cracked and broke into pieces when touched. Xiao Xian felt that he was also dehydrated. He drank all the remaining water in the kettle, but it could not replenish the water in his body. It was just an emergency. A huge hole formed around him. Outside this hole, the seawater was still flowing in a vertical circle, but it no longer affected the stone surface. It was very dark. This place was some distance from the surface of the sea, and there was very little light that could penetrate. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had a special ability to see. Sitting on the stone surface, Xiao Xian thought what to do next. The feeling of lack of oxygen was weakened. Of oxygen, of course, it was better than suffocation.
A death.
After calming down, his physical strength gradually recovered, and his mind gradually became clearer. He wanted to go out, but he did not know when this would. Should he stay here and wait, or should he walk along the long stone path in the hollow? Not divination? There was no rope on his body. Should he use cloth? This time, Xiao Xian did not intend to rely on the divination method that he did not know if it would succeed. Instead, he followed the shaman's words. When faced with difficulties, seek answers from the totem flame. When in darkness, the fire will light up the path ahead. It was just like when he was trapped in the King Stoneworm's cave. Closing his eyes, Xiao Xian felt the totem flame in his mind and carefully observed the movement of the flame. At this moment, his will almost merged with the flame. The flame jumped and floated to one side. Once, twice, thrice, after confirming that the movement of the flame was not accidental, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked ahead. In front of him was the direction of the flame. It was also a path that he could not see the end of and could not guess the future. Looking at the whirlpool of seawater around him, Xiao Xian took a deep breath and lifted his feet. Hesitation would only waste time. Since he had made a decision, he naturally had to act quickly. Xiao Xian did not know how long this hole would last, or if it would disappear halfway. But since the fire had made this choice, he would try. In fact, even without using the fire, he had the intuition to move forward. Indeed, it should be safest to stay here and wait for the change to disappear and then return to the surface. But Xiao Xian still intended to follow his intuition and the fire's choice. Even if this was a path of no return, he would continue. The surroundings were very quiet, as if all the sounds of the outside world had been blocked. Only the sound of Xiao Xian's footsteps could be heard. It was empty, as if Xiao Xian was the only person left in the world. When he was hungry, Xiao Xian scraped the dried seaweed from the stone ground to eat. It was very rare to see seaweed that could still cling to the stone ground under such a strong tearing force. It did not taste good, but it did not take much to replenish Xiao Xian's strength, so he would not starve to death. Xiao Xian also discovered that even though the seaweed had been drained of water, its roots that were deeply embedded in the stone ground were still intact. If everything returned to its original state and seawater covered this place again, it might continue to grow normally. It was really a strong plant that could survive in extreme environments. The further he went, the darker the hole became. At first, Xiao Xian could still feel an extremely dim light coming from above, but as he walked, that dim light disappeared. Xiao Xian did not know how long he had been walking in this dark hole, nor did he know how long he had been eating the dried seaweed. Every day, except for the time spent resting and eating, he had been running forward, fearing that the hole would return to its original state in the next moment and he would be buried in the sea. This sense of pressure had been urging Xiao Xian to run faster. He also had a water source. He carried the rain stone given by Yang Sui, which could condense water. This hole was only drained of water in a short period of time, but after the hole was formed, the water on the rainstone could still form normally. Moreover, he did not know if it was because he was at the bottom of the sea and was surrounded by water, but the speed of condensing water in this stone was much faster than in the desert. Xiao Xian was very lucky to have this stone with him, otherwise he would have died of thirst. When Xiao Xian's taste buds were not sensitive to the seaweed, there seemed to be some dim light around him. Xiao Xian did not know if this was a short period of time, or if he was approaching the end. When he saw a mountain wall, he was sure that he had reached the end. The hole ended here, and the stone ground was close to the mountain wall. However, the surroundings were still the same. Xiao Xian had no choice but to continue waiting for the sea to return to its original state. Every day, he still maintained the same state as when he was on the road, eating, drinking, running, and exercising to maintain the best physical strength and state to face the powerful tearing changes that might happen next. After a while, the movement of the sea finally changed. The air was pulled away in the blink of an eye, and the surrounding water vapor gradually thickened, and the powerful tearing force reappeared. Holding his breath, Xiao Xian, who was ready, calmly hugged the stone ground. When everything was over, Xiao Xian swam desperately upward. Splash! His head emerged from the sea and breathed in the air with the smell of the sea. Because he used his special vision ability most of the time in the sea, it did not take long for him to adapt to the bright world. Opening his eyes, the dazzling Yangguang made Xiao Xian fall into a trance for a moment. He even felt that he did not know what year it was. In front of him, it was not a high cliff, but a piece of land. Some columnar cacti grew on the land, and some animals that looked very similar to camels stood up and bit off the flowers from the columnar cacti. A camel chewed on a cactus flower and looked at the sea. When it saw the people on the sea, it flicked its long ears twice. Chapter 353. Xiao Xian swam from the sea to the shore. There were no other creatures in the sea because of the changes in the sea below, but once the changes were over, more sea creatures would appear here. Xiao Xian didn't dare to take the risk. After going ashore, Xiao Xian finally had a feeling of being on solid ground. When he was in the sea, although he was stepping on the stone ground because he was still in the sea, surrounded by seawater, he didn't have the feeling of being on land. He had to constantly worry about the hole disappearing at any time. His heart was always hanging, and his nerves never relaxed. He was really physically and mentally exhausted. Taking a deep breath, feeling the dry sand around him and the wind mixed with the smell of the sea, Xiao Xian had a feeling of being alive again. This feeling made him want to release his voice and roar a few times. However, in such a strange place, making a sound may cause some unnecessary trouble. Therefore, Xiao Xian could only hold back. Not far from a slightly higher place, a few camel beasts were chewing cactus flowers with a look of contempt. They raised their heads slightly, but their line of sight was lower in the terrain, where Xiao Xian was located. Some of them had seen humans before, but they had never seen anyone appear in this place near the sea. They had never seen anyone here since they were born. Therefore, the appearance of Xiao Xian surprised them. However, even if this species was surprised, the expression on their faces was still the same, a despicable look. The surrounding ground was very dry. Although it was close to the sea, the scorching temperature from the surrounding sand and stone ground, as well as the sparse and withered unknown plants around, told Xiao Xian that it probably hadn't rained here for a while. Unlike the desert at the other end of the sea, this was not pure sand. It was just that because of the drought and long-term weathering, there were more fine sand and stones. In other words, it was more like a mountain just close to the sea and not so high. Perhaps a long, long time ago, the sea level was not as high as it was now, and the long stone belt connecting the two ends of the sea under the sea was exposed to the water. In the stone room where the notes were stored in Snowfield City, the blind old slave had said that the slave owners came from the sea. They might have passed through the narrow stone zone from here. Xiao Xian thought of the feeling he had when he was at the bottom of the sea, and the thought of the fire seed when he made his choice. Could it be that some people from the Yanjiao tribe who had disappeared for a long time also came to this land from the other side of the sea through that narrow and long rocky area? Xiao Xian didn't feel the existence of the fire seed, so he wasn't sure if the Yanjiao tribe really existed on this continent. However, he wasn't discouraged. Nearly 1,000 years had passed, and anything could happen. Just as Shu had said, there was a crisis in the tribe, and that part of the Yanjiao tribesmen had disappeared because they were looking for a solution. Thinking up to this point, Xiao Xian was suddenly filled with anticipation. After shaking off the water on his body, Xiao Xian drank some of the water he collected from the animal skin bag. His water bottle had broken when he was at the bottom of the sea, so he could only use the animal skin bag with rainstones as a water bag. The skin of the fierce beast was strong enough. Although the bag had been used to store other things in order to survive, he didn't care too much. It was a good time to relax. Without the pressure of the sea, every cell in his body seemed to have a carefree atmosphere. His physical strength was rapidly recovering, and Xiao Xian swung his arms and walked along the sand and stones. He didn't go far immediately. For the time being, he didn't detect the existence of other threatening beasts, but if he walked for a while on land, it might not be the case. What he needed now was to quickly replenish his physical strength, not to find a beast to duel. Speaking of which, after being a vegetarian for so long, as a Yanjiao who had always been a carnivore, Xiao Xian felt his teeth itch. Looking at the several camel beasts that were looking at him from a higher place, Xiao Xian couldn't help but imagine them all as roasted whole camels. Xiao Xian still wanted to wait until his physical strength was fully recovered before dealing with the camel beasts. Unexpectedly, the other party was quite alert. It seemed to be aware of Xiao Xian's intention. It raised its head and turned its neck, turned around, and left. It didn't give Xiao Xian any extra glances. Xiao Xian. Seeing the camel beasts leave, Xiao Xian didn't chase after them. Instead, he waited until his physical strength was almost recovered, and he had enough ability to protect himself before moving. It was really dry here. As he walked forward, the surrounding plants were mostly column-shaped cacti. Some of the flowers on the cacti pillars were eaten by the camel beasts just now. Even though they were animals that were good at living in dry areas, they still needed to replenish their water supply. If they didn't see any fresh water and didn't want to lick the seawater, they could only nibble on the flowers. The flowers on the cacti could provide them with the water they needed to survive temporarily. As he walked forward, there were more and more column-shaped cacti around him. They were also much taller. Even if there were flowers on the cacti, the camel beasts wouldn't be able to eat them. The surroundings were very dry, and there were obvious cracks in many places on the ground. The surrounding heat waves seemed to want to drain all the water from the ground, constantly scraping. However, it didn't take long for Xiao Xian to feel the changes in his surroundings. The wind blowing from the sea was cool, completely different from the heat waves on the ground. The changes in the surroundings cooled the warm and humid air flow over the land and soon formed a white fog. Standing at a high place, Xiao Xian could see some white fog clouds near the coast. The wind from the sea blew the white fog towards the land. It was as if there was fog around him, and soon, more and more white fog shrouded him. When Xiao Xian breathed, he could feel the obvious increase in the water vapor in the air. On the plants growing around him, water droplets condensed from the fog gradually appeared on the branches and leaves. On the cactus pillars, water droplets gradually condensed on the slender thorns, growing from small to large, sparkling and translucent. Xiao Xian even saw plants like lichens attached to some cacti. When the fog appeared, they would absorb the water vapor in the white fog like a sponge. The fact that such plants could survive meant that white fog often appeared in this place. It was no wonder that although the surroundings were dry, there were still some plants, unlike the barren desert on the other side of the sea. There were more and more animals moving around, and the water allowed life to continue. Living in such a place, every animal knew how to use the natural environment to survive better. Small flying birds came over one after another, landing from the air and resting on the cactus pillars, drinking the dew condensed on the cactus thorns. In a place where there was little rain but a lot of fog, the dew brought by the fog was almost a life-saving resource for all the animals living around. Because there were many animals moving around, Xiao Xian was on guard, but found that there were mostly small animals here, and most of them were not a threat to him. As for large beasts, Xiao Xian hadn't seen them yet. Xiao Xian also collected some dew. He couldn't always rely on the rainstone. In the sea, the rainstone's ability to condense water was very strong, but on the shore, the surrounding was still dry, so the efficiency was low. So, when there was an opportunity to collect water, Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't let it go. Chapter 354. The further they went, the less dense the fog around them. However, it was still there. Unlike the places he had been to before, there were fewer small beasts active here, and the atmosphere was not as harmless as before. It was full of quiet tension. Xiao Xian tied up the animal skin bag and held the only short knife in his hand. He stepped lightly and cautiously forward. At this moment, Xiao Xian heard voices. He had not seen anyone for a long time, and now he finally heard people's voices. Although he was vigilant, Xiao Xian's heart relaxed a lot. It was good that there were people. He was afraid that this was just an uninhabited land. With a change of direction, Xiao Xian went in the direction of the voices. The fog there was thicker. Listening carefully, there were two people's voices. Moreover, Xiao Xian could understand what they were saying. The language here was more inclined to the language used by the slave owners. This also proved that the slave owners back then might have really passed through here. Once again proving a guess, Xiao Xian was in a better mood. The two people seemed to be collecting dew, as well as some plants that absorbed the dew. Is this enough? A young woman dressed in coarse cloth looked at the basket she was carrying and asked the person next to her. The young man standing next to her, vigilantly looking around, quickly glanced at the basket, shook his head and said, "Look for more. It hasn't rained for a long time. If it continues like this, it will be difficult." "That's true. Then look for more. Be careful of your surroundings." "I know." "Be careful. Back off." The young man took 2 steps forward, blocking the woman behind him. He held a long, strange-looking knife in his hand and looked not far away. Not far from them, some sand and stones were moving slowly, making a subtle rustling sound. Below, something was squirming. But soon, the movement suddenly became louder. The other party seemed to know that they had been discovered and no longer hid. A long line protruded from the ground, and with a puff, like a spray of water vapor, the sand and stones on the ground rolled up, and the protruding line formed a long dragon. A dark brown giant insect that was more than 3 meters wide and 10 meters long rushed out from the ground. It had many legs, and its body was segmented and covered with hard plates like armor. It quickly came towards the two people. The young man's body suddenly erupted with an aura, and with this aura, some earth-colored lines appeared on his body. This was a totem warrior. The giant worm stood up like a snake and attacked the two of them. It seemed to have noticed that the man was more difficult to deal with. After 2 unsuccessful attacks, it changed its target and went around the young man. It bared its fangs and attacked the woman who was holding the basket tightly. Although the young woman was a little weaker in terms of combat power, she was also good at running away. If she didn't have the ability to run for her life, it would be impossible for her to survive here. However, under the giant insect's attack, she was very embarrassed. There was a lot of fog around, and the ground was not flat, which reduced her speed. If she slipped, her speed would be greatly reduced, and it would affect her escape. Seeing that the giant insect had changed its target, the young man was anxious. He ran over, trying to stop the giant insect before it attacked. Even if he couldn't stop it, he had to attract the attention of the giant insect. Just when the two people were anxious, there was a bang. The giant insect that was about to attack the young woman was suddenly hit by a big stone. Probably not expecting to be attacked like this, the giant insect was stunned and didn't know what was going on. Before it could recover, another rock came crashing down. This time, the force was stronger, fiercer, and more accurate. It directly hit its 2 open fangs, causing it to almost fall over. When the giant insect stabilized,
Crack.
a tooth fell from the giant insect's mouth. The other tooth of the giant insect wasn't so bad, but it was still hurt. Even if its body was hard, it couldn't withstand one big stone after another, not to mention that it lost a tooth. How could it continue like this? There was no sound, but the giant insect's actions showed that it was angry. No one would be able to remain calm if a tooth was smashed off while hunting. Abandoning its original prey, the giant insect turned to look for the source of the stone. It had already sensed the location of the person who threw the stone. The vision of the average person was limited in this kind of fog, but the giant insect was different. It could even accurately find prey within a few hundred meters in the thicker fog. The furious giant insect rushed in the direction of Xiao Xian. Originally, it thought that the little guy who threw the stone would definitely run away when he saw it coming, so it would have to spend some effort to chase him. However, the reality was completely different. The person who threw the stone not only didn't run away, but also rushed straight in its direction. Looking at the momentum of the rush, it was not afraid at all. Xiao Xian had hunted for a long time. He had been repeating the boring activities at the bottom of the sea, eating, drinking, sleeping, running. As a Yanjiao, he probably yearned for the exciting hunting life in the mountains. After coming ashore, his hands began to itch. When he saw the group of camel beasts, he almost made a move. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to recover his strength, he would have done it long ago. Now that he saw the scene in front of him, of course he had to make a move. The totemic power in his body exploded. At this moment, Xiao Xian could even hear the powerful beating of his heart, like the beating of war drums before a battle, encouraging him. His blood was surging, and every part of his body was filled with a sense of impatience. How long had it been since he felt this way? After a long silence, Xiao Xian once again found the carefree and hot-blooded feeling he had when he was hunting in the mountains with the same tribesmen. His strength, unwilling to be silent, became fierce, like the waves of the sea, as if it was going to sweep everything away. Every step he took on the ground made a roaring sound, like a heavy beast's paw slapping the ground. Compared to the two people before, Xiao Xian at this moment was more like a fierce beast living in the mountains. It was refreshing to stretch out with full strength, then retract, then suddenly explode in the next moment. Just as the giant worm stood up and was about to attack, Xiao Xian stomped on the ground. The sand and stones under his feet exploded, and the air was blown into the air by this stomp. Much of the fog was dispersed. The tyrannical force propelled his body forward, and Xiao Xian rushed towards the giant worm like a cannonball. He broke through the fog and kicked the giant worm's throat. That was where the giant worm's fangs and 2 long forelimbs could not reach. The giant worm had actually felt Xiao Xian's aura before it attacked, and hesitated. But it was too late to do anything now.
Retreat?
There was no way to retreat. Even if it felt that something was wrong, what could it do? Xiao Xian's kick was faster than the giant worm's, and it had no time to react.
Bang!
The sound of the collision was like a huge hammer hitting a mountain rock, and it sounded in this world shrouded in white fog. Taking advantage of the giant worm's change of target, the young man from before took the girl a little further away. Then, he turned back to look at the giant worm. At first, he was still thinking about who had come to help them so that he could immediately return to fight with the other party. However, when he turned his head, he saw the clear body of the worm flying out of the fog with a loud bang that made their hearts skip a beat. Flying, the eyelids of the two young men twitched at the same time, and they even had the urge to rub their eyes to see if it was an illusion brought on by the fog. After landing, the long body of the worm rolled a few times on the sand and stones, knocking down a few cacti. There were sounds of hard chunks falling around them, and one of them fell by the young man's feet. He looked at it and saw that it was the shell of the giant worm's scales that had fallen off. There was still some worm skin stuck on the inside of the shell, and the shell was used to protect the worm's body like armor, but a few pieces had been kicked off. This. The young man swallowed his saliva. Who the hell is this? Holding the saber in his hand, the young man thought to himself, even if I used the saber in my hand to chop it, it would be difficult to even leave a deep mark on the shell, let alone break the shell. The other party actually managed to kick the shell off. Hiss! From the looks of it, the worm's belly was kicked upside down. After being kicked, the giant worm that was rolling on the ground felt that Xiao Xian's momentum was still rising. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't seem to be satisfied with the kick and wanted to do it again, it didn't care about the pain and quickly crawled into the ground. For a short time, it couldn't eat because of its throat injury, and the other injuries on its body also needed time to heal. In any case, it didn't plan to come out for a while. No, it would even leave this place and avoid it. When the giant worm left, the two young men who came out to collect dew nervously looked at the figure in the fog walking towards them. Although they were very grateful for the other party's rescue, they couldn't remain calm after seeing the scene just now. They were so nervous that their foreheads were sweating. They wanted to say something, but their throats seemed to be stuck. They opened their mouths a few times but couldn't make a sound. They didn't know what kind of tone to use and what kind of words to say. If they angered the other party, would the two of them also be kicked? Xiao Xian slowly walked in the direction of the two men. He had just finished the battle, and the power in his body hadn't calmed down. He was still lingering and didn't seem to be satisfied. The air on the surface of his body vibrated, and even the fog around Xiao Xian's body was dispelled. Running at the bottom of the sea for such a long time was tough and uncomfortable. Both physical and mental pressure had impacted Xiao Xian's body, but he did not weaken. On the contrary, it was as if his body had been tempered and became stronger. The leg that kicked the giant worm was slightly numb, but it wasn't uncomfortable or injured. When he rushed out, he seemed to already know that the kick wouldn't hurt him. When Xiao Xian came closer, the two men finally saw Xiao Xian's appearance clearly. Because he hadn't changed his clothes for a long time, Xiao Xian's cloth clothes had already become rags, revealing his body. The smooth lines of his muscles were like the hardest stone that had been polished. If they hadn't seen the scene with their own eyes, they wouldn't have been able to imagine how terrifying the power contained in this person's body was. The two men looked at the appearance of the person who had kicked the giant worm. He was quite young, and the other party looked at them with a kind and amiable gaze. He didn't give off a fierce feeling. From appearance alone, the two men really couldn't imagine that this person had such ability. Chapter 355. Seeing that the other two had been silent, Xiao Xian took the lead to break the silence.
Hello.
Xiao Xian smiled at the two in a friendly manner. The barbaric and ferocious momentum of kicking the giant insect had disappeared without a trace. With Xiao Xian's words, the atmosphere eased a lot, and the tension of the young man and woman suddenly relaxed. Hello? Hello. Although the atmosphere eased, the young man still stuttered when he opened his mouth. He was still nervous facing Xiao Xian, But thinking that Xiao Xian had just helped them, he also showed a smile. Thank you for just now. We are from the Maka tribe. My name is Wanfu, and her name is Shuerui. According to Wanfu's introduction, the two of them were husband and wife. They were married not long ago. The tribe was some distance from here, but not too far. After all, there were not many tribes in this remote and arid place. Their Maka tribe was already the closest to here. Because it had not rained for a long time, the two did not store water at home. Their family had difficulty living, so they came here to look for opportunities. They did not know when the fog would appear, but in order to wait for the fog to come, in order to collect water, they were willing to continue to wait. Fortunately, their luck was good this time. In less than 2 days, they encountered the fog. They came to a place where the fog was thicker to collect some moist edible plants and also collected some water to bring back. By the way, which tribe are you from? After introducing themselves, Wanfu asked Xiao Xian. My name is Xiao Xian. As for my tribe, I don't know where it is located on this land, because I was born and raised outside and have never seen a tribe. My parents and ancestors were born and raised outside. Xiao Xian was right. He was indeed born in a place outside this land. If there was another part of the Yanjiao people on this land, he did not know where the tribe was and had never seen anyone else. Hearing Xiao Xian say so, the expression of the two people looking at Xiao Xian suddenly changed, summed up in one word: pitiful. Xiao Xian. At first, Xiao Xian was still wondering how much of this lame story would convince the two of them. If he said this on the other side of the sea, people who heard this would definitely think that it was nonsense. Living outside and never seeing other people in the tribe, weren't they just wanderers? How could wanderers be so powerful? How could a wanderer suddenly become a senior totem warrior? It was better to find a better excuse. However, in this place, the two young men really believed Xiao Xian's words and did not doubt him at all. Xiao Xian couldn't help but feel puzzled. The two of them weren't stupid. At the very least, they were still on guard. However, they didn't doubt Xiao Xian's words. In other words, the situation here might be different from that on the other side of the sea. When Xiao Xian looked at the totem patterns on the young warrior's body, he noticed that the totem patterns on the young warrior's body were brighter. Even though they were only the grayish-yellow color of sand, they didn't appear dull. Instead, they gave off a sense of vitality. This was different from the totem patterns on the vast majority of totem warriors that Xiao Xian had seen before. In the Yanjiao tribe, except for Xiao Xian, when other people used their totem power, the totem patterns on their bodies were also dark. There were many strange places. Have you heard of Yanjiao? Xiao Xian carefully observed the reaction of the two. This was a new place. If there were Yanjiao people here, he didn't know what kind of attitude other people would have towards the Yanjiao tribe. When Xiao Xian went from the other side of the river to the other side to look for the old land, he had always been high-profile and didn't hide anything. Because he was high-profile, the shaman let him spread the name of Yanjiao. Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't restrain himself. But here, Xiao Xian had to be cautious. There were too many strange places. Wanfu and Shuri were still a little confused about the word Yanjiao. The word was unfamiliar to them. Is Yanjiao the tribe of your ancestors? Or is it something else? Wanfu asked. Seeing that the reaction of the two people was not defensive and hostile, Xiao Xian nodded and said, yes. Thinking about it, Wanfu scratched his head and apologized to Xiao Xian. I seem to have heard of it, but I can't remember. Then forget it, I'll look for it later. Xiao Xian was slightly disappointed. Wanfu and Shuri saw Xiao Xian like this, and their hearts once again lamented. Poor man. For this young man who had helped her and had a poor life, Shuri couldn't help but sympathize, pulling the corner of Wanfu's clothes. Wanfu knew what Shuri meant, and he himself had the same idea, so he said to Xiao Xian, do you have any arrangements now? Why don't we go back to the Maka tribe together? We also want to thank you. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Well, then I'll bother you. He really needed a place to get to know this strange continent well, inquire more information, and get a complete set of clothes to wear. With Xiao Xian following, Wanfu and Shuri were much more relaxed. Knowing that Xiao Xian was strong, they were not too worried. There were not many threatening giant beasts here. Most of the time, they could solve it by themselves. Otherwise, they would not dare to come here with just 2 people. Encountering a giant insect was just bad luck. After chatting a lot with Xiao Xian, Wanfu also let go of some things and said a lot. We came out with the rest of the tribe. When we came here, we split up, and then we'll meet again in another place. There's no other way. It hasn't rained for a long time, and the spring water on the mountain has been cut off. Everyone's life is difficult, unless we go farther to find water. We don't want to go farther, so we came here to try our luck. Xiao Xian watched them squeeze the water absorbed by the lichen into the clay pot. They did not let go of the lichen. After squeezing the water, they threw it into the basket and brought it back. This lichen was edible. Following Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian also learned some survival methods here, what things could be eaten and what things could not be touched. If it rains, we don't have to run so far to find dew, Wanfu said with emotion. Although his mouth was full of emotion, he did not complain much. Living in such a dry place, he had long been accustomed to it. In his memory, there were longer dry periods, but they all survived. The methods were found by oneself. Only people who did not want to do anything and did not want to do anything would die of thirst. Seeing the appearance of Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian glanced at the vines wrapped around a tree that was not thick. Some branches of the vines had withered because of the drought a few days ago. Xiao Xian casually tore off a piece, and his hands began to move. Wanfu, who was collecting dew and talking to himself, did not notice Xiao Xian's movements. After a short while, Xiao Xian finished the knot, looked at the conclusion, tore the knot, and threw it away. 10 days later, at noon, it should be able to rain, Xiao Xian said. Wanfu and Shuri's movements of collecting water paused because of this sentence, and they both looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. You know how to read the weather? A little. Xiao Xian did not say much. Wanfu and Shuri looked at each other, not knowing whether to believe Xiao Xian's words or not. However, no matter what, they still had to collect dew now. Even if it rained 10 days later, they still needed to get through these 10 days. After the jars and baskets were full, the 2 left and went to the place where they agreed to meet with the tribes. The further they went, the thinner the fog became, and the air became hotter. When they felt the scorching heat again, the surroundings were still dry and barren, far less vibrant than the fog-shrouded place. When they went to the meeting place, Wanfu hunted a beast, and Xiao Xian also hunted too. Although they were not as good as the giant worm, they had more meat. Even if the giant worm was a vicious beast, it did not have much meat and could not eat much. Xiao Xian, who has been a vegetarian for a long time, did not care about being picky. Of the 2 beasts, one was for Xiao Xian to eat himself, and the other was for Wanfu after he went to the Maka tribe. He planned to stay in the Maka tribe for a while, so naturally, he had to bring some gifts. He could not rely on the credit of saving people. When the sun was slanting, Xiao Xian also saw the other people of the Maka tribe who came out with the Wanfu couple. Several of them were injured, but fortunately, no one died. This was already a very good situation. Wanfu introduced Xiao Xian to them. Originally, when they saw Xiao Xian's rags, they still had some disgust. When they caught a glimpse of the 2 beasts that Xiao Xian hunted, their faces eased a lot. Some of them also hunted some beasts, but they were not as good as Xiao Xian's, and the quantity was not as good. When they returned to the Maka tribe, the others saw Xiao Xian carrying 2 beasts and chatting with Wanfu easily. He was not even out of breath, and they could not help but be surprised. However, the Wanfu couple also said that after seeing Xiao Xian throw a stone at the giant worm and kick the giant worm, they were not surprised. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.